Thanks, Lee, for joining me. It's a trying time today in 2020. We have a lot of challenges in our community, and we thought that this might be a good time to share the success stories of 2018 eruption, and in particular the community response, all the different actions of individual citizens that really help things work, help things move, help the relief effort, and really save people's sanity at the very least,
and even their life.
even their lives. Yeah, yeah. Lei is was part of the community response as well at the Uhonua or Puna Community Hub, and has since written a couple of books about the community response. And so she is one of our local experts and someone who kept really good track of what was happening during the eruption. What's your longest standing impression or feeling of the hub time that we spent, Lei?
How valuable the community talking to each other helped everybody come together to get what they needed, to get just healthy, to deal with issues. But it took everybody coming together to do it.
Yeah, it really did. It was a lot of different people, yeah, who did a lot of different things, and people specialize in different aspects of the response. And so we really wanted I in particular wanted to really document all of this and put it all together in one place so that as time goes on, we can kind of not only remember what actually happened, but kind of use this as a source of strength kind of going forward. So there was a lot of challenges that were kind of overcome, and I'm not going to focus so much on the challenges themselves, but rather on the response people had, and without dwelling too much. Although we'll kind of touch on what the issues were that were surrounding all the response, of course, as we go through it. But the first thing I wanted to do is just say that for a lot of people, it's actually still very soon. It's been not that long. 2 years might seem like a long time since eruption actually came into our lives in 2018. But the recovery is still ongoing. People are still traumatized, and people may still not have a stable housing or income or any of those things that they had before the eruption in 2018. And so my first thought is, to express sympathy and solidarity with the people who were really destroyed, really had their livelihoods destroyed. Looking over at this picture of Kapoho, east of Pukapoho, all the houses that are buried under lava over there is really like a heartbreaking thought. And so just want to acknowledge that, and I understand it might be difficult for some people. And, the point of this is not to bring up those painful memories, but more to focus on a positive response that we really had, and, the strength of our community and how we really can help each other to overcome, any kind of challenge.
What we're going through right now in 2020 is not the last disaster, and we will need to we will need to come together as a community again and again and again.
Okay, so the story begins with 3 triggers for alarm in April 2018, the month before the eruption began. And this is kind of what was setting the stage for the citizens to actually take their actions. And of course, this is the official response and the official warnings that were kind of passed out to the public from authorities, which include the USGS Geological Survey Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, who are excellent at reporting the science of the volcano to the public. And the first trigger that was witnessed by the community was the activity notices that were put out by the USGS. This is their top level priority alert. They put these out fairly infrequently, so when one actually goes out, it's a pretty meaningful thing that it's probably a significant change in a volcanic system that often might include eruption or flows going some new direction or something really worth documenting for posterity. And so there were two that were put out in that second half of April. The first one on April 17th was relating to the pressure and uplift at Pu'o'o. And here is a time-lapse image of how the floor of Pu'o'o was swelling from below and being pushed upwards by the magma that was building pressure underneath there. And 12 miles away, and this video taken right afterwards, the summit of Kīlauea, Halemaumau, was overflowing at this lava lake. And this was something that's happened before, but not to this extent, not this much lava covering this much of the crater floor and this many overflows in a short period of time. So that elicited its own activity notice on April 24th. And so kind of combined, 1 week apart, two notices, pressure swelling in the rift zone, pressure swelling at the summit. those of us that pay attention to these things really knew, okay, well, this is a high alert time to watch out. Maybe not quite code red, but certainly like a, yellow or orange alert, something along those lines, depending on what color scheme you use.
And it also put all of the people who were living in this area on alert too. Many of us were checking HVO all the time at that point.
Especially in the context of what had happened a few years earlier in Pāhoa, which we'll go into in a little later. But people were not unfamiliar with the idea of lava being nearby. So the second trigger, came on April 30th. We just passed the 2-year anniversary, and that was the collapse of Pu'o'o. There was a earthquake, about a 4.2, I believe, that set things off, and then the earthquakes, there were 5s and more that kind of followed in the days and weeks ahead. But the kind of very first one that broke whatever was holding the magma back under Pu'o'o on April 30th set off that big pink cloud, and those of us that were in the Puna area where the eruption was going to come, where the alerts were most meaningful, certainly remember where we were, right? What's your story, Lei, about the pink cloud?
I was on my way to work and I saw it happen, and I changed my direction. Instead of going to work, I went over by the transfer station and met John Tarson over there, who was doing a live feed on it at that point in time. And I asked him, what does it mean? And he's like, I'm not sure. And I said, is it going to be an eruption? He said, well, it's already an eruption. Well, that doesn't help me much. But that's where I was. I was sitting on the old lava flow, looking at it over the transfer station.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, we've heard. Yeah, and it was the first of many pink clouds, right? So like that was kind of just the first one that set it off, and we kind of kept our eye on the horizon every day after that, especially if we felt earthquakes, right? And the science of it, you guys can see those pictures of the before and after of the collapse, right? 2 weeks before it actually collapsed, the floor is swelling during this era, and you can see that there's a couple of little craters, but they're essentially have high crater floors. They're indented, but it's not like a huge sunken pit like you see post-collapse on the right over here, right, where the crater ended up being over 1,000 feet deep after the magma underneath it pulled out and went downhill, and that was the collapse of all this red rock you see exposed now that made this nice pink ash cloud that kind of drifted over all of Puna.
And that the ash that was in the cloud fell out all over the flow, all the way down to the ocean by Kīlauea.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, people were talking about that in the early days. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, picking up the pink ash, and what an amazing time that was to in hindsight. What little do we know on April 30th and looking at the pink cloud, what we were in for, right? But I suppose right after the collapse happened, like what I'm calling a third trigger is a combination of all the different events, that essentially are the ground moving, all the earthquakes that kind of rock the residents. So this is a animation from the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, NOAA, and they have a sequence of the earthquakes across the entire eruption. And all I've done is actually clipped out just the first 4 days, April 30th to May 3rd. This is before that big 6.9 earthquake, which will come next. But before that happens, between April 30th and lava coming out of the ground on May 3rd, the ground was rocking pretty constantly, and that was something that was hard to ignore the closer you were to the area, right? So you might think, that might have been a one-off thing. There have been other clouds from Pu'o'o in the past, and it might have been, it's just something in passing, or it's extra steamy today, and maybe not quite so pink, right? But when these earthquakes added that third layer, right? And then, in fact, on May 1st, the day after the collapse of Pu'o'o, USGS puts out a third activity notice, warning of a possible eruption in an area of the Lower East Rift Zone, including Leilani Estates. That was certainly, like the, red alert time for many and most of us. We'll let people see how many earthquakes were rocking the area there. Yeah, so it's just looping through right there, right? April 29th and May 3rd, right? So you guys can see Pu'o'o collapse happening right in here. And then the earthquakes migrate down to the east after that.
And the people in Leilani and down rift from Leilani they describe it as it was just shaking constantly.
Right. So that was kind of the setup, right? The setup as far as what people were experiencing before lava came out of the ground, and what happens, the day before the eruption, we started seeing community leaders emerge, right? Like Ikaika Marzo. And, there was information coming from civil defense. In fact, we'll mention a little later, there was a voluntary evacuation suggested for parts of Leilani on May 2nd, right? But I don't know if there was enough oomph behind that, or enough, concern expressed, or, most people didn't really take action on that from what I've heard, right? It took until the next day when lava was coming out of the ground to really ramp things up.
There were people, though, there were a lot of people actually who just said, I can't take all this shaking, especially the people who'd been through eruptions before. Then they just said, no, it's time, I'm going. And they got out of there beforehand.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Yeah, so right away we're wondering, is an eruption coming? We've had situations in the past where there have been earthquakes and intrusions of magma underground and lots of shaking, and lava did not come out of the ground. Like 1924 is a great example of that in the Lower East Rift Zone, right? A lot of deformation and railroads were buckled and put out of commission, but no lava came out of the ground. Something was still to be determined: was lava going to come out of the ground? Was it going to actually be an eruption or just an intrusion? And if it was going to erupt, where was it going to erupt, and when was it going to erupt? And so the information coming out, was coming from Honolulu News. It was coming from our local civil defense and the USGS HVO, but really it wasn't frequent enough for a lot of people. And so people like Ikaika took to the ground and started doing their own research, interviewing members of the community and trying to figure out what was going on and sharing that with all the neighbors. People could really make informed decisions and be kept aware and up to date of what was happening, not on a day-by-day basis, but on an hour-by-hour basis.
Well, hello everybody. Down at the crack on Pohoiki Road. This crack runs from Pohoiki all the way to Leilani Estates. This crack is actually getting wider every minute. We're just talking stories with the USGS guys here with the orange and talking about what's happening. Main thing, these cracks don't have white smoke coming out of cracks. That's the first indication of eruption that is going to happen. From that, after will be like a little spattering and all that kind. Oh, and then from there a full-blown explosion. So, not too sure we're going to give the evacuation order. I think civil defense will. How was the earthquakes last night?
Oh, me. I kept me up every 2 minutes. It seemed like
Every 2 minutes.
it was shaking.
How much do you think?
Oh, I heard there was over 230 or 40 last night.
You guys heard it from the man. He lived right over here.
Even still, the night before the eruption, there still wasn't that much information coming out. Ikaika was compelled to put out a call on social media for people to actually activate and pass information online in that manner.
We have some newscasters around giving us stories, but our Puna people, we need more. We need more. We want to know more. We want to be informed more. So if anybody has anything to share on social media, go right ahead. Like if you see any cracks or anything, and be serious about it, because our community here needs it for information. Anything happens, I'm sure that civil defense and HVO, Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, or Hawaii Volcanoes Observatory, would notify everybody quick enough to make that proper decision making.
And that's really what led to the pivot in eruption coverage, really, right? Where we were looking at social media, and because of the more frequent information that was coming out, and especially Ikaika, especially in those early days. And when it came time for us, not just us as a public, but even some of the authorities to learn about the eruption, it was Ikaika's video that they turned to.
If I might add, a lot of people were pretty sure that the messages coming out from civil defense, if you waited until civil defense told you to do something, you were far too late.
Right. They would eventually catch up and put some notices out, right? But the timeliness is an important point.
And Ikaika kept us all informed when we needed it. And you too.
So let's hear Ikaika break the eruption on social media here. And this is where he really got his mainstream following.
Hello everybody. We have an eruption. Just letting everybody know, we have an eruption right now. Eruption in Leilani. No joke. Lava is coming out right now. We get some lava coming out right now. Look at the smoke. right here on Mohala Street. Mohala Street eruption. Kokai. Oh my God, it's happening. It's happening. It's happening right behind Brada's house. Here it comes, guys.
Besides just where is eruption, it was also, here's what it looks like. The first week of coverage, right? That was the week that 15 fissures opened up across the 3 miles, and one after the other. And Ikaika was at essentially every single one of them. And in that first week, lava took 36 homes in Leilani Estates and Lani Puna Gardens.
All right, guys. Lava is pumping right now in Leilani Estates. It's pumping out here. Makamai Street, Leilani Estates. Fissure opened up about 20 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago. Amazing, crazy stuff. Whoa. So fountain right now is going over 150 feet right now. Eruption on Luana Street. New fissure opened up. I'm not too sure if it's 8 or 9. About a 100-yard fissure. Little less, little more. This flow has started right on Luana Street and it's going down to Makamai, so at an angle towards Leilani Street. There's another breakout. Okay, we just heard another breakout that is breaking up higher. Another breakout that is happening higher up. So this is Luana Street. We're here with the USGS. We will confirm on Nohea is the one up from this. It's moving up the rift. USGS will confirm that. All right, guys, you guys heard it. Stays classy, Puna.
Well, that was that first week, and included in that footage was that first little activation of Fissure 8 that he wasn't sure at the time was either 8 or 9. It was kind of hard to keep track of the numbers. The numbers are, as they were labeled, and different segments of different fissures were opening up in real time, and sometimes two different segments would be counted as the same fissure, and sometimes it'd be two different fissures, and it was kind of hard to keep track of the numbers all as it went on. So he's not sure at the time, but it's actually Fissure 8 that later ends up being the source of most of the destruction. Although lots of other fissures had plenty of destruction as well. You can really see how he's trying to inform people, and he's really side by side with the USGS and telling people what streets the lava's coming out on, and so people can really have in some cases, up to the minute report of what's going on.
So crucial in that early time.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah. Yeah, so to me that was really a pivot point, in hindsight, looking back on how things went down. What really just happened there is, I'll explicitly put out two things that happened. First is that the public turns their focus to citizen science, in particular watching Ikaika's live updates to understand where the lava was, what was happening, right? And then that kind of turned to community action in response to the eruption, which we'll get into here shortly as well. And the second thing that kind of goes hand in hand, a complement to that, is there was a lot of public alarm at the gaps in the official response, how much support was provided, to who it was provided, what stipulations were given, and as well as the communication, information flow, what was being told to people, how soon it was being told to people, whether they could actually have enough time to do something with that information, like, for example, pack your belongings in your house and move out of there, rather than have to run out and leave everything behind and everything burns down. It's not just property, but pets as well, right?
Absolutely.
The worst of it, yeah. So, like I said before, I'm not going to focus really too much on that official response part of it, but really on the the citizens' response to that, and how whatever gaps that were exposed, and whether it's in the official response or just some other aspects of society that isn't sufficient. There isn't a sufficient enough fail-safe, a net to catch people, similar to what might be happening today, in an era of COVID pandemic, right? There may be cracks in the systems that just don't account for everybody, and our community does value everybody, and so it really comes down to the people to mobilize and to fill those gaps, right, and take care of each other, right, and that's the strength of our society, especially here in Hawaii, but also other places, in the world, where we can really look at that as our strength to deal with natural disasters like we are, like we did in 2018 and like we are today.
Absolutely. I remember how it started with the community response, and the people who were coming out of Leilani, they may have some of their belongings, they may not have any of their belongings. There was nothing set up by any of the authorities for anything. There wasn't even a place for them to stay at that point. They were allowed by the director of Parks and Recreation, they were allowed to stay at the community center, but there wasn't anything set up, and it sort of grew as it needed to in response to what they were doing. But the main part of that was they were allowed to set up a tent. That didn't give them a way to have food. That didn't give them a way to, okay, fine, we have a tent. But that's the hub opened up, I think, on May 3rd. And that's when people began getting everything that they needed, from toothbrushes and toothpaste to tents to sleeping materials, clothing. And shortly thereafter, there was meals for them, which they couldn't get anywhere else because they had nothing but a tent. So it was very, very important to have that community response early and right on time, instead of having to wait because the authorities never did get around to doing what needed to be done.
People's livelihoods were really at risk. That their actual lives themselves were at risk, especially early on in eruption, as Ikaika quickly turns his attention to evacuating people in the area.
We got to get people out of here now. Hello? Woo! See if anybody's home. Do you guys live close?
Yeah, why?
Yeah, evacuate right now. The lava is pumping out right now. So
Are you serious?
I'm serious. There's an eruption right here.
Okay.
Yeah, get out of here.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
try-
you very
yeah,
much.
You're welcome, guys. Going to be coming out. Now, they're only going to spew out a little bit. And once it spews out, it's on.
It's gonna spill out right here.
Bro, going to come out this hole. We're going to fissure right across. You're welcome, you guys. How's that cool? Lava. Popping right here. Right inside here. How's it going? There's an eruption right now. Right here. Go home, get your stuff out. Get out of here now. Evacuation now. Yeah, cause we get a big eruption right now. Right here. Yeah. Get your stuff out of here. Eruption right now. Yeah, so get your stuff out of here. If you guys was there, get your stuff out of here.
Okay. Hey,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. We're evacuating everybody right now. Everybody in Leilani Estates, please let everybody know, get out of here right now, because lava is gonna be coming out. Help people evacuate now. Help people evacuate now. As we're saying right now, there's a big eruption happening right now. So we radio with the guys, they're working hard. Get some more. Give me some. I'll help these brothers over here. Yeah, evacuate now. We told everybody, try to keep everybody updated. We knew it was going to happen. Evacuate, evacuate, evacuate.
So very dramatic footage there of Ikaika with no one else in scene, until we see the crew shows up and they're starting putting out roadblocks. And at that moment, you can see Ikaika providing a live information update, evacuating people, and physically placing barriers in the road all at the same time, which I find incredible. Like how much one person can do. And, of course, there's all the organization that came beyond that, of course, Ikaika is a central figure to a lot of the story, and not the only person, of course, but certainly one that dominated the early part of the story here. After this initial coverage of his went viral, he was basically fielding interview requests from news all over the world. And so turning to our local news station here in Hawaii, KHON, here's a little clip of what they reported happened with the evacuations.
Joining me today is Ikaika Marzo. Can you tell me, there were homes in that area, and do you know if the people evacuated already?
We tried to get people out as fast as we could. Unfortunately, they had to leave some of their belongings, and we got everybody out, fortunately.
Everyone is safe.
Yeah, everybody.
Right.
So once it happened, we three of us ended up going out, going to every street on the lower part of Leilani, try to go to every house, try to get everybody out as quick as possible, and head to higher ground. And unfortunately, it was just us doing the evacuation notices, but fortunately we got the majority of people out.
Yeah, unfortunately, it was just us doing the evacuations. That did change, right? That was just the very first day, the very first hour of eruption, right? Not being prepared for the first hour I would like to point out, that there were all kinds of work being done by the civil defense and by all the entire infrastructure put in place by the mayor. National Guard was involved. Evacuations were put out kind of all the time, right? But they weren't always mandatory. There were kind of so many of them. They would come, they would go. So on May 2nd, it was Leilani voluntary. On May 3rd, it was mandatory for the parts that were closest to the eruption. On May 4th, they expanded to Pohoiki Road. And so for those first 3 days of eruption, while houses were being burned down, whoever left Leilani couldn't go back into it, right? And so people who were trying to evacuate stuff only got one trip out and weren't able to go back, so that means you get to choose between your stuff and the actual people in your family, let's say, right? And so of course you're going to take the people out, and people lost, untold amount of stuff in there, just because of that policy and the lack of preparation of policy. And then actually by May 6th, all the community plans, Ikaika and others were, trying to mobilize and making plans for evacuations to happen, whether it be under escort, under armed guard, or what have you. Find any way to get people in there. They finally, on May 6th, opened it up to everybody after having spent 3 days of not doing anything in response to these plans that were being put out, right? And finally, everyone can go in, and it became a gigantic traffic jam, and no one could get in because it was so disorganized once again, right? And then they instituted a placard system where you had to have a placard issued from somewhere in Hilo and bring it back over and present it with your license, and it had to match the vehicle you were in, which meant if anyone was bringing a truck in and trying to help you move out, they couldn't get in with you. So it was a huge fiasco all around, right? Not to say that work wasn't being done, but it's just the organization of it, the level of efficiency, that things are actually getting done in a useful manner didn't really materialize for a long time. And, by the time it did, things had stabilized, and that was great that we got there. But for the first month entirely, you can see here the list on the left, like how many different, policies and areas were being affected by different evacuation notices, right? PGV, right? After the community calls out the fact that there's pentane on site and it's not the best place to store it, considering the approach of lava and the involvement of the governor was needed to actually mobilize the pentane off of the site. I mean, it's amazing all the different little aspects, little tick marks that went unchecked. That it was like, hey, what about this? Hey, what about that? Brush fire, right? The brush fire that started from lava igniting the dry ground and burning houses and essentially not being combated, right? That there was one early on, the prejudice alert in May, but there was also other ones that happened later on in July as eruption went on as well. There were quite a few community meetings that were held. So here's an image of a packed house in Pāhoa cafeteria. People trying to get an in-person update from authorities, right? The staffing at civil defense and accounting was way inadequate. With less than less than half a dozen people full time, right? Really just couldn't keep up with everything needed for what ended up being a 4-month-long extended disaster, right? So the disaster was so huge, both in Lower Puna, but also in Volcano Village at the summit of the Kīlauea, that even the USGS, with their 20, 30-some strong staff, was stretched thin. I can certainly see what the challenges were, right? We'd certainly wish that lots of things had gone different.
Absolutely, especially when it came to people's livelihoods. We won't point any fingers, but their livelihoods, they were told many times they would be able to get help from this organization, and then this organization would send them to that organization, and they would be denied and told, you're going to get denied, but come back and do it again and again and again until you get help. Now, if you're in a disaster and you don't even have your house, how can you do that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and there was a lot being done, but despite every effort that was put out, there were still those gaps that existed, right? And that's why what we mentioned before, the community action aspect, putting together the hub, was really so important, right? So this is what Leigh was referring to. This is the relief center that Ikaika and Ashley Kirkowitz and many others put together and staffed and organized and ran for over 3 months down the corner of Highway 130 and 132, right outside of Pāhoa. Right near the eruption area, right? So coming out of whether it was Kapoho or Leilani, you kind of went right by that intersection. So it really was like, a traffic hub, but it also was a hub of where people could go and get supplies, get hot meals. The food got to be really good once World Central Kitchen came into it, right? I mean, it was really good before that, but it was extra good afterwards.
I can't say enough about World Central Kitchen.
Yeah, they were awesome, right? And they've since gone on and responded to disaster after disaster. It's all they do all over the world, bouncing from one place to the other, helping feed people. So they're really an amazing organization. We were really happy that they ended up serving at the hub, right? And that was kind of an interesting story because they didn't have to serve at the hub, right?
They didn't have to, but they wanted to have a place where everybody would know to come and could come, and they wanted to make it that was something that was feasible. So they managed to use the kitchen of a local business that was not up and running yet, a local restaurant business that was not up and running yet. And then we all ported the meals back and forth, and that they were able to cook professional quality restaurant meals for people who are in a disaster and living in tents is just wonderful.
Yeah, really epic work. Yeah, so we're very thankful for their part in it. You guys can see all the water stacked here, at on these pallets down here at the bottom of the hub. Yeah, over here is our little dining area, right? The meal line is kind of behind the water over here. It's a different view here up top, right? And you guys can see personal supplies, toiletries, clothes, right? Tents, and things kind of evolved as time went on and people's needs changed, right? Because right away they were like, well, I don't have a toothbrush. 3 weeks in, everyone had a toothbrush by that point. But they didn't have, a nice mattress pad, or the tent was leaking, or they needed something else, or they ran out of dog food for their dog that was living in their car, in a parking lot of wherever they happened to be, or those kind of things, right? So it was really, a hub in many different ways, right? And so to talk a little bit more about it, it was really, really nice that there was a shared meals, shared conversation at the dining area where, just having a chance to sit and talk to people and have them understand what you're going through, because you have a chance to kind of sit and let it out and kind of unwind a little bit, because most of the time everyone is on such high alert, right? Okay, what am I doing now? Where do I go next? What do I gotta have? I have everything I need. Where's my gas mask? How much room have I got? Who have I got to call? It was a scramble nonstop for days and days and days on end, and so to have a chance is just stop and take a breath and like talk to your neighbor and that's sitting next to you and say, hey, what kind of crazy days have you had today? And everyone had some kind of crazy day, and it was just like, how is it crazy for you, and how is it crazy for you? And that was essentially a big support system for people, to know that was a safe place for them to express themselves and share what they were going through. And even if it meant breaking down and crying, just having someone there to give you a hug, right? That was something that happened pretty commonly, actually, right?
Absolutely. And if I might add, it was a huge part of something that gets really lost in any disaster, and it's really lost in 2020 right now, is the mental health of people who are going through all of this. For us in 2018, they came into the hub, they had somebody who understood and talked to them. Right now they need toothbrushes. They don't need somebody to talk to. No, that's not true. From the day that their houses got either affected or they got evacuated, they were under stress, massive stress. And they needed to be able to have an outlet, to have understanding, to have community members who would be there and they could just talk. Or they could not talk and they could just listen and just be part of something that felt good, felt homey, felt accepting.
Yeah, safe. Yeah, I think we had several examples of people who would just hang around and listen for hours and hours, and eventually, like by the end of the day, they would actually be ready to share their story, and their story would be powerful and amazing and tragic, but they weren't ready. It took understanding. It took being there and understanding that everyone was going through it together, and that they were welcome to share, and it was safe to do that there, and there was no one's going to come and present any more challenges to the ones that were already facing. So it was also a place where people could really share what problems they were facing, right? What challenges. Well, I need to move so and so an object, and it's so and so size. I need so many bodies, and so and so a size truck, and I don't have it, or I need a trailer, or or, my cat here, or whatever issue people had, they could actually find someone there to network with who would say like, oh, I have an extra truck, or I have a bunch of guys just waiting for something to move, or I'll look for your cat, or, whatever it happened to be that people needed a solution for, or whatever. That if you couldn't find a solution to your problem, you just had to go to the hub and sit there for long enough, and it would present itself to you. Like someone would show up that would come through there who knew, and of course we were helping. Oh, you go talk to that person. That person can really help you. And that kind of thing was really hugely important there as well.
Absolutely.
And the last thing to mention on is, the information part of it, right? One of the ways of coping is actually trying to process and make some sense of what's happening, whether that be through some very basic science, or what have you, right? We use a lot of analogies to try to help people relate to what was happening in terms they could understand, right? That let people be able to make informed decisions, right? To know, for example, that the eruption really could last several months, and to get as much as you could every time and as quickly as possible, because at some point that ability to evacuate things would disappear, right? And that we had a little bit of a glimpse of that early on, through the lack of organization. But, at some point later on, you actually have a road being cut off, and you just can't get in and out of an area anymore to actually get things physically in and out. So kind of all the aspects of it, being able to decide, okay, well, here's what I need to prioritize. And sometimes it was as simple as just having someone to help talk you through it, right? Because you're in a panic mode, and someone says, okay, pack everything of your life in 15 minutes, we're going to be out of here. Then you might just go blank and freeze and say, well, I can't do it. I can't. There's too much stuff. Can't even think about what's first. So someone might be there.
Especially under that stress.
Yeah, and someone might be there and say, okay, paperwork. Where's the paperwork? Money. Where's your money? Where's your jewelry? You got all your pet supplies, your medications. Like, we had a list set up that we'd actually go through with people, right? Check this, check that, check this, check that. Like, and write these things out ahead of time. So if it comes to be your turn to evacuate, you have it ready to go. You can just look at it and not have to try to think on the fly, oh, what do I do now? Because at that point, it's a little bit too late to really deal with it in any kind of way. It's going to be traumatic no matter what, right? But you actually can get through it and save more stuff, possibly, and if you're a little bit more mentally prepared to take that step, right?
Those lists were so important, because the people they were not in a position to be able to think for themselves at that point.
Yeah, it's really, really hard to kind of convey what that was like, right? That's something that's not really as relatable in what's happening now in 2020, right? We're not doing a lot of running back and forth physically from place to place, right, anymore. That's kind of, in 2018, it seemed like there was a lot of that was happening, just trying to mobilize stuff. I got to get all this stuff from here to there, and I get all that stuff from there to over there, and a lot of that was happening all the time.
And most of us are not in the position where we're going to lose all of our possessions, in the space of 5 minutes.
Right.
Or, the ones I can think of for the eruption was when they came through and they had the horns blasting and such, and they said, you have 5 minutes to get out, and it's 2:00 in the morning. How do you think about what to take at that point in time? Here, we actually can now we don't have a lot of that going on. But what we do have that's very relatable to that is the community connection and the need for everybody to check on their neighbors. Is my neighbor okay? Is my elderly neighbor, do they need food? Do they, it's kind of the same, only it's on a much larger, more spread out scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's what we've seen so far, especially here locally in Hawaii, right? And of course, the story is at different levels in different places, right? So one story that I came across, a few months ago already now, relating to the breakout of the pandemic in China, is how there were volunteer animal networks going and rescuing pets, that didn't have owners anymore, or the owners were quarantined, or sometimes, in some areas you have animals that rely on kitchen scraps from restaurants or those kind of things, right? And there just weren't any anymore. Right. So that's something that really resonated with me, and so the hub was a place that people didn't actually stay overnight. They mostly got the supplies to go to other places to sleep, whether it would be with the help of neighbors or family or friends. And lacking that, one of a handful of places that were open locally and across the island for people to take shelter. In Pāhoa, it kind of started off with the community center, as you mentioned, Lei.
There was the community center. That's where most people who were not elderly and didn't have health issues and did have a tent would stay. But there was also the senior center for the elderly. Eventually, after a couple of months, we all built the tiny homes, and that was also for elderly or disabled, which gave the disabled people a better place to stay. It's really to be put in that situation when you're disabled and you don't have a house, and where do you live? You can't live in a tent. So they really needed that. They did get that. After that, there was opened up a tiny home type unit, but it was for families, and that was Halaiki. And that one opened up fairly late. I think it was around the end of the eruption, or maybe even after the end of the eruption. But just the eruption is going or isn't going. If your home is gone, your home is gone, and you don't necessarily have most of us don't carry around enough cash to say, okay, I'll go out and buy a new house. It's not something that's like that. If your house is gone, your house is gone. And there are still people, even now, who don't have housing from that event. And there is currently an affordable housing group that is working very hard to create housing for the people who still don't have it. And now with 2020 and people losing all their jobs and such, I'm sure the number of people who need that kind of housing is going to just skyrocket.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that in that sense, in that facet of it, the disaster continues, for the area of Puna, right? We never actually got out of it. The housing space of dwellings was never been rebuilt, right? Everyone's still kind of crammed in everywhere else that's left over, right? Slowly, we're recolonizing lava flow with roads and infrastructure, but it's still a far cry.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, you can see in a picture over here we have the tiny houses. Image down here in the bottom left and the top right, different versions. The Bodacious Women were another group that helped out with supplies and distribution. More in the Nanabala area. April Buxton was a huge instrumental leader.
April she lived in Leilani, and she was evacuated early on. I don't remember if she lost her house or not, but she was living in a tent up at the community center at the very, very beginning, when there was nothing there and there were no entities to help them with getting anything. So April laid out $10,000 of her own money and went shopping and bought all of the necessities like cooking stoves and whatever the people needed up there so that they could live. And that was $10,000 of her own money.
It's amazing. It's amazing. The heart she showed, and how generous she was, and we all saw how much suffering was happening, right? We're really thankful to people like April and all the other helpers as well, right? There's a lot of helpers that it's going to be impossible to mention everybody's name, what everyone did. I'm kind of just trying to paint a broad picture here, as far as all the things that were done. All the faith-based communities all came together regardless of denominations and really made a cooperative that was hugely helpful as well for people still today, right? Trying to help more with the recovery and making sure that everyone is having their needs continue to be addressed if they're not have been solved, to kind of keep at it. And there's frustration that people are still dealing with this stuff 2 years later, but there are some good people still trying, and they're trying despite the inefficiencies of our system. There were shelters elsewhere in the island, like Hilo, Waimea, Kona. People were kind of migrating elsewhere from Puna. Some people moved away to the mainland. There was definitely a big exodus, from the area. There was a lot of people in the shelters nearby in the area, but that was kind of only a fraction of who was affected, really, right?
And the entire island, there was people moving out of that whole region and all over the island. And you're right, there were a lot of people who dispersed all over the world too, to the mainland. There were a lot of people going back to the Asian countries. They went all over the world, but they were still part of the community, and it was still something that affected all of the community even as they were fanning out all over.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah, and that's something that you mentioned earlier, how we had that kind of community that had like a shared experience that everyone kind of went through everything together. And first, it was in person around the hub, and physically connecting and eating meals together. And then as people dispersed, it kind of migrated to a more of a digital aspect, right? We still had local meetups at the hub, that kind of was ongoing for several months, but people really were able to connect digitally and maintain that sense of community after they left and kind of stay updated, by the whole use of social media, which I thought was something really novel and really interesting to be part of. Social media, we'll turn back to social media now a little bit and, how people were helping in that aspect of it. And Ikaika was still doing eruption updates. And in fact, a lot of those were getting posted on Tracker. Hawaii Tracker is one of the digital hubs and Facebook group. And Facebook actually made a promo video that features Tracker, but it also speaks more to the community response and the kind of solidarity that was exhibited during eruption. So I'd like to play that video for you guys here.
The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people are evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, my group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
A powerful video from Facebook, really talks about the strength of the community there. And, that was when they came and, visited and they filmed hours and hours and hours and hours of material. That was what the strongest message was to them, what they saw from far away. And it's the same message we're reiterating today, right? It's the strength of the community, how really our community's got the strength to get us through natural disaster and to get us through other challenges to our systems that we don't have, a response in place already. So speaking of the response, I think it's worth going into a little bit, what was different from 2014-15 Pāhoa flow to the 2018 eruption that happened, about 4 years later. 4 or 5 years later, 3 or 4 years later, I guess. And so in 2014 and 15, it was a much different deal, right? Even though the whole scenario, let's call it the whole situation, might have lasted about 6 months in total, it was really about 4.5 months from when lava was really threatening infrastructure and not in the middle of nowhere and actually, had touched the road by the transfer station that you mentioned earlier, Lei, on October 25th. And the last lava lobes kind of behind Malama Marketplace petered out around March 10th or so, right? So that was about 4.5 months of lava being near, threatening. It actually did cross over the transfer station road. It did go across the Buddhist cemetery. It did destroy one structure in that area, and it didn't quite make it to Pāhoa Village Road before it did destroy someone else's property. Small structures on the back of the property as well. But really, overall, it didn't destroy a whole lot. It was mostly threat, right? I was listening to a podcast that Bruce Amori and McAlbert did yesterday, and, they said it was basically all just hot air, right? It was a bunch of buildup and then a whole bunch of nothing kind of at the end, right? Which is not at all how we would describe 2018, a much different view of it. So just to put that out there, we're going to compare a little bit of the official response between these two events, but it was a little bit of a different thing because, there was so much time leading up to the impact of infrastructure in 2014 and 15. And in 2018, it happened pretty much right away, right? But kind of setting a precedent because the people who were living in the area, like you, Lei, actually experienced 2014 and 15. You had a precedent, right? You had some expectation that was built of how that response had gone, right? For example, there were 20 top priority alerts that were put out in the 7 weeks in 2014 and 15. In comparison, 2018, there were only 8 that were put out in the 10 weeks. So it lasted 3 weeks longer, but we had less than half the amount of alerts. And of those 8, only 2 applied to Lower Puna, right? The one on May 1st and May 3rd. Eruption is imminent, and eruption began. Those are the 2 that applied to Puna. All the other ones applied to the summit of the volcano, lava lakes overflowing, possible ash explosions, aviation risks, downgrading of aviation risks, that kind of thing, right? Really, so of all that, there was only 2 notices that went out to Puna, and it happened 2 days before the eruption began and the day the eruption actually began, right? Whereas in 2014 and 15, right, there was a much longer buildup, right? About 2 months, maybe, 7 weeks of time before lava actually touched the road, right?
And not only that, that whole time we were having weekly updates so that we knew what was happening as close as they could. We learned from that eruption that volcanic eruptions are not terribly predictable as to exactly where they're going to go or how big they're going to be. Or how far does lava flow before it stops? We don't know. It's always hit the ocean. How do you know then? But we had those meetings. And because we had those meetings every week, we felt much more informed. We felt much more like we had been considered. All of us people who were living down rift from, or down flow from that, we felt like that we mattered to the people who were supposed to be taking care of us. A lot of that was not necessarily so in 2018. And there's some question about that in 2020.
Right. Yeah, so I've got written on here, we had 28 community meetings that were hosted by civil defense in the 27 weeks of crisis in 2014 and 15. So yeah, about one a week on average.
In the very earliest days, it was like there was one every like 2 weeks or such. And then it became very, very fast and furious after that. It started out slow when it wasn't around any buildings. And then as it got closer to buildings, it was like, we need to keep people informed.
Right. Right. And then it kind of tailed off again as it backed up. And so it varied in a natural response to the proximity of the flow to infrastructure, right? But to your point, in 2018, we had 18 weeks of crisis. We do recognize that at the end of the eruption, towards the end of the eruption, we had 2 big weather events, right? There was Hector and then there was Lane that kind of came through. And that did kind of put extra stress on the already strained civil defense, right? And so they actually canceled community meetings to prepare for those weather events, and people were still not informed. So they basically had to choose to prepare or communicate, and they, of course, had to prepare, but the communications got dropped entirely during that time period, right? It's interesting to look back on now, but, the point essentially is that people had expectations of being informed, of being cared for, of having this open line of communication that didn't quite materialize in that same manner in 2018 for whatever reason, whether it's the actual size of the eruption, the geographic extent of it, staffing, what have you, right? All those things kind of contributed. As far as the USGS side of things, what's really interesting to me is that they kind of did an autopsy on their response of 2014, and what they came down to deciding was that the only things they could really rely on for their forecasting was their steepest descent lines, right? These are the little blue lines that are on the maps that kind of show where lava is likely to go in most simulations, mostly the downhill direction, yeah. They found that trying to predict the rate of advance of the flow was very difficult. They would say the flow is going to cross the road in 3 weeks, and then it was in 2 weeks, and then it's in 4 weeks. And it was always very variable because the advance rate would vary so much from day to day, hour to hour, that any projection based on it had a huge error margin, right? And you just really couldn't tell, is it 1 day or 30 days? Who knows, So that's something that they really did away with in 2018. You never really heard them say in public, oh, the flow is going to reach so-and-so point on a so-and-so day. It was more like, this is where it is now, and here's where the lines are of where it's likely to go. And that was largely what was left. And it was kind of passed off to civil defense to say, okay, well, what do we do with this information? There were other reports, like there was the broad assessment report of how long the eruption might last later on, but that was essentially such a huge range that wasn't really useful, and it caused more of a panic than an aid to people. But we'll leave that and focus more on what people were dealing with in our community. Still tune into social media and to Ikaika, who keeps covering eruption, and by the second week we have Fissure 17 booming, making these loud explosions that were audible to me here in Fern Forest, 20 miles away, right? And that's something that the first few nights I didn't really understand what I was hearing, but after having been down by the eruption site and being near the explosions and learning the pattern and the rhythms of them, and coming back here, especially on calm, quiet nights, I could actually hear the booming from Fissure 17 from all the way up here in Fern Forest. So 20 miles away. So for everyone who was actually in the area of Fissure 17, right, even not right next to it, but how many miles away do you live from that, Lei? 3-4 miles maybe?
4.
4 miles, yeah. Yeah, and what was that experience like, hearing those booms?
It was very scary. We didn't really know what was going on. There was nobody except Ikaika to tell us what was going on. And it was, I remember actually I ran into the hub one of the days and I said, "What is going on out there?" And everybody just sort of looked at me, and I'm like, okay, whatever it is, it's all right. It's not going to kill us. But I cannot tell you how many PTSD animals we have who are still traumatized every time they hear any sort of loud noise because of those fissures going off and all of the booming that was going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it kind of all went together. The booming and the vibration of the ground. It was like just wiggling, and then the smell, and then the weather that would swirl and come. It's such a multi-sensory experience. But the booming was a big, very concerning part of it, right? And that's something that Ikaika definitely wanted to take the time and address in his updates. And so here's a little clip of that second week of coverage. I won't keep showing more coverage of the eruption of Ikaika's, but this is really the last one to really illustrate how he's trying to calm people and explain what's going on and reassure them that things really are going to be okay. So let's play that clip for you guys now.
There's a lot of lava coming out of here. So this fissure is about 200 meters, 150 meters to 200 meters long. But this is the longest that a fissure has been active. So those big booms you guys see, we were talking stories with the USGS here, and they would say that that's the majority of it is gas buildup. So you can see it pulse, goes crazy, then it stops, goes crazy, then it stops. So those booms, people could hear it all the way from Fern Forest last night. I mean, you can actually see it go about almost 800 to 900 feet in the air. Some maybe over 1,000. So at least you guys know what's happening, Puna, with all those noises. Don't be alarmed. Everything's gonna be okay. Everybody's okay. The lava is out in the forested area, so it's not harming anybody right now as we speak. Have a good night and stay classy, Puna. Aloha.
All right, so he's really trying to reassure people, yeah, everything's going to be all right there. Yeah. And so besides just informing what was happening, what the sounds might have been, we also tried to explain and interpret the USGS data, right? And that kind of came in a form of forecasting, right? Explaining what those blue lines in the maps actually meant to people when a flow came out at a certain location and what that might actually imply. So here's a clip of when Ikaika and I are discussing different possibilities of what might happen. The surge of the flow is still coming. That's a big concern, yeah. So we're not sure how much it's going to keep increasing. There haven't been as many earthquakes, more at the summit, as the summit's still kind of sagging because all the magma left. If there's any kind of silver lining, is that the magma there is gone. That means at some point we're going to run out, but that's not going to happen probably for a long time. Yeah, it could be several weeks, it could be a few months even potentially before that happens. So the key point is that this is still, as much as we've experienced as humans, this is still the beginning of the main eruptive phase of this lava.
So what we've seen now is just the beginning of a huge eruption. Do they expect higher fountaining as more fluid lava arises in that portion of rift zone?
That's an interesting question, yeah. And the fountains are not going to be gigantic, if that's what you're asking. Not nowhere like 1,000 feet like was in Kapuho.
Do you think Pu'o's reign is done?
I personally think that Pu'o is dead. Yeah. It'd be normal to expect more earthquakes as that whole South flank adjusts. Yeah, that's going to go on for a while.
Right. So 6.9 earthquake, what's the likelihood of a bigger earthquake occurring?
What I think you mean is the chance of one happening really soon, and I would say the chance is actually lower since that one released the pressure that was gone, yeah. This new flow right here, let's say that this becomes as active as this one is going, it's going to have the same pattern. It's going to go fatten in both directions, but eventually flow out this way, right here. This flow has been reported to come perhaps as far as over here, and that's kind of the concern. If it's going along the road this way, then it's been able to jump from this line of descent to this next one over here. And if that's the case, then this is a flow that's causing concern for the area of Kapoho, because now it goes straight to Four Corners, which is right there. And here's Four Corners, and then
into the ocean in beach lots.
That was a special place, Green Lake, that was in that crater. And of course, not to mention the champagne ponds, the tide pools, Kapoho Bay, the area all through here, Kapoho beach lots. Unfortunately, it looks terrible. It looks like most of these communities are devastated. There's a little patch of houses still remaining right up in here, and you hope for the best for those guys, but you see this flow is also spreading out to the side, right? So it doesn't look good. I hate to say it. We could see that the flow was coming, and it was going to take out certain neighborhoods. You know, once Fish reactivated and we saw the flow coming out, we could really tell that it was going to just cut through. We didn't know how fast it was going to happen, but the direction was pretty clear from that point. You know, and that kind of comes from the forecasting that USGS has with their little blue lines, and then interpreting it so people could actually understand what those meant, right? By actually pointing to it with their finger on a map. That was really the contribution there. And, you know, mapping was something that was important across, you know, the whole eruption, right? You know, early on, there weren't any official USGS maps coming out because it was just too quick a situation developing. The fissures were opening every few hours, a new fissure would open up. And so here's our initial map of the fissures that we kind of crowdsourced, right? So this is a county-issued map down here. It's got May 5th as a date, right? And we actually have gone and had this map on a table at the hub, and people would come out of Leilani after evacuating, and they would stop in and they'd say, here, I tried to go down this road, but the lava's over here now. And so you can kind of see some of these little light outlines of lava flow patterns on these streets, right? They'd say, okay, I didn't see this and this and that house. And so we kind of just dash it in there and try to get confirmation later on of where the flow might actually be, but we'd know which routes were the safest in and out. So the person who was lined up to go into Leilani could come get this information from us and know, okay, well, Moku Street's the one you got to go through because that's the only one that's not cracked if you need to get to the south side of Leilani, right? That kind of thing. And there's reports that Fissure 9 has been very gassy in the last couple hours, so you better not go in there unless you have a gas mask, you know, that kind of thing, right? And just know, you know, or, oh, the gas seems to have died down, or the cracks widened. It's not, that road was passable yesterday, it's not passable today, or it might have been passable an hour ago, but it's no longer passable now. A new flow is coming across that road, or there's a new crack and it's starting to steam a lot and you probably don't want to drive over it anymore in case lava's coming out. Whatever it happened to be, we'd kind of crowdsource this map, and, you know, people coming in, people going out would come and stop in and make, you know, we'd ask them, when you come back out, please make sure to stop by and tell us what needs to change on the map, you know, help us update the map. And so that's really a special map to a lot of us to kind of see this, you know, hand drawn where the fissures are drawn in here and then which roads are passed, and it looks, you know, it's not very professional, obviously, but that's what got the job done at the time, right? And then later on, when the USGS did put out their official maps, we were able to really point to these big blue descent lines, like here coming along the side of Kapoho and Vacation Land to fill in a Halanui Park, right? That was something that was predictable once we saw the channel break uphill of Kapoho. So mapping was a very important aspect of it, and it doesn't end with just that. Ryan Finley actually took the USGS written report from May 1st and actually added the interpretations from the May 2nd daily report, and was able to take an old USGS map and highlight the area of projected eruption, right? And this is the day before lava came out of the ground, and this maybe wasn't seen by everyone at the time, right? But he was right on, obviously, as far as where lava came out of the ground. And those that were paying attention were able to get a little bit more time, and time was very valuable in this kind of scramble, especially at the beginning there. Some more of the mapping initiative that was done. Dane DuPont with Hawaii Tracker really took the initiative to put together a map of the homes that were lost. The official counts were lagging very far behind. By May 28th, this crowdsourced map that Dane put together shows over 244 homes lost. At that point, the official count was only 41. And over time, the county caught up. At the end, the numbers converged above 700. I think the official number now is 716 is the last one I saw. But that doesn't include, just so everyone's clear, it doesn't include anything that wasn't permitted, that didn't have any documentary evidence, right? So let's say that you actually built something unpermitted and it burned down. It's not going to be a part of that count unless you have some, took out an extra policy claim on it and documented it with photographs that it existed and all the other requirements that are necessary for that burden of proof. So the real number is a lot higher than 700, right? Is kind of the point I'm getting at. We don't exactly know what the real number actually is. Some people might say, might round it to around 1,000, but it's really impossible to know. We know that the actual permitted houses that were being taxed that were lost, 716, right? But at the time, this was really important because the FEMA threshold for assistance is dependent on the number of homes that are lost. And so by undercounting and lagging behind, we actually shot ourselves in the foot from getting FEMA assistance sooner because we weren't counting the homes lost well enough. And so come to find out, when we did apply to FEMA, governor's office went and found this map that Dane posted on Hawaii Tracker and then lifted it and put it into their official request for FEMA assistance right on page 2. Right there it is. Here's the governor's request, and here is the map from Hawaii Tracker from just a few days before, and you can see it's identical. It's exactly the same map, right? So when we're talking about the community and citizens actually rising and filling these gaps in response, right? Not just at a local level, but really for the whole response that goes all up to the national level in this case, right? And this wouldn't have been possible to happen as soon without the work of one talented individual who had initiative and motivation to do that for his community. So shout out to Dane DuPont there. 5 days before is when this map appeared in Hawaii Tracker. Some other notable mapping initiatives. Ian York really led this community lava map project that was crowdsourced, where after people dispersed from the hub and weren't drawing on a piece of paper anymore, people were actually going and evacuating. They were coming back and able to report online on a school map platform where the flow was day to day, hour to hour, and submit the report as well for the crowdsourced database. So that was hugely valuable as well. USGS did put out their official maps, but that was about on average once a day, and that was already impressive because of the amount of processing and error correction that they put into those maps, right? It's something that presses to go through it. For them to go through that every single day was really quite an achievement. But even that was just not fast enough for someone who was trying to go in and out multiple times a day into Leilani, and flow is advancing down the street, right? Well, one final one to add here is some work by Les Peterson, where he actually recreated the blue lines, steepest ascent lines that USGS maps with slightly different parameters, and by doing that, he's able to actually pick out that there is ambiguity in the area where the flow could turn to Kapoho. And so by doing that, he was able to anticipate the flow was going to swing to Kapoho by utilizing that road, and was issuing a warning to people in Kapoho several days ahead of anyone else. In fact, he came on my live stream and had to convince me that he knew what he was talking about. And I was like, who is this guy? And I sat and listened to him and, heard what he had done. And I was like, well, by God, you're right. Like, the lava is heading to Kapoho. So we should be taking more actions towards that. And, I'm not sure that all his yelling and screaming about it got people's attention, really, because we still had, time crunches when it came down to it at the end of evacuating Kapoho. And people leaving stuff behind, right? I remember there's a clip that Ikaika and Mileka are talking, and they describe how it's like being in a science fiction movie. It's just so surreal.
That was just so scary. That's the only really way to describe it. It's like a ghost town. There were people who clearly had left their lights on in their homes, car doors open. You could tell that people picked up and left with no indication of when they might be coming back. They thought they were. I mean, I think that that's what lights on and car doors open mean, right? People thought, okay, we'll be right back. We're leaving now in a frantic panic, but we're going to get a chance to come home. And all of those people are realizing that that might not be the case.
That was the state of panic, right? Like they're like trying to load their car, and like we're abandoning this car. Just left the door open and just ran off in the other one, right? So front door is wide open, just stuff lying on the sidewalk. It's just so surreal, right? And that's something that maybe we could have, in hindsight, wish we would have done better at. Yeah. So I mentioned the Hawaii Tracker Group several times now. Les and Ian and Dane and myself are all been part of that modern digital hub, right? And that's kind of how I think of the Hawaii Tracker Group is a digital version of the hub, right? That was able to kind of collect all different social media information and not just post them on their site, but actually vet them, right? Check them for accuracy and credibility, and sometimes getting multiple, whenever possible, getting multiple sources, confirm photographic evidence, that kind of thing, to really control the misinformation that was harmful to people, right? And undermining the actual response that was needed. And so I put in here, there's a report that was done by Jennifer Haney and Claire Havis out of Bloomsburg University of Pennsylvania. And this is a publication of the National Hazard Center. And they came and interviewed people at the hub to figure out how things were working. And they called out Hawaii Tracker as the go-to resource for many residents. The group is public, which made it accessible for residents to view with and without a Facebook account, and that's how a lot of the information actually was transmitted. While they were there, there was a report of a brush fire that came through, and I think they just kind of sat quietly at the table as we, mobilized all of our eyes and ears and got confirmation, got photographs, and then were able to report it to community as well that there was a brush fire ongoing.
We all realized how necessary it was to have something like them, no matter what the disaster is, because they do such a good job of making sure it's accurate, of making sure it's timely, of getting it to the people when they need it and the way they need it in an understandable format. It's invaluable, and it is spreading.
Yeah, especially now as we see that a lot of our traditional media is under threat, right, with all the financial troubles that's persistent across our economy today. Yeah, and so up here you can see a lot of the Tracker core group. You can see Ryan Finley, top left, Andrew Hara, Dane DuPont, myself, Sarah Wilkinson, Harry Durgan, Ken Boyer, Les Peterson. There are many more people involved in that, right? But that was the core group of managing the online hub, especially during that crunch time, right? And of course, it's evolved since then, and now in the COVID era, it's largely being spearheaded by Dane and Sarah themselves. The misinformation was really an issue across the board, as it is today, still with the whole pandemic issue, right? That's just kind of the new era of media we live in. There's a lot of information you have to kind of sort through to get at the truth, right? And it's tiring, right? And it takes energy and it takes time to do that. And that's something that in the middle of a crisis, there's just really not the time to go and vet everything. And that's why that group became so reliable, right? And so such a crutch for people, right? And here's an example of some of the media that was being put out at the time. A volcano could explode in a once-in-a-century eruption. My favorite, it may spew fridge-sized refrigerators. But you also see, why it could be so terrifyingly deadly, very high threat levels. There's, a lot of kind of, clickbait journalism to try to grab attentions that was going on, right? And so there's kind of two responses to this as we see it. One is to kind of be scared of it and say, oh God, let's just try to put a clamp on all of it. And the other is to kind of say, okay, well, this is actually feedback that we could use, right? And so Dr. Janine Krippner at Smithsonian has said that social media allows scientists to see rumors forming in real time, as well as receive instant feedback when something's misunderstood. So for someone who's really trying to communicate, especially in a time of a disaster when it's so much back and forth so frequently, you really don't want a misunderstanding to perpetuate and propagate across a community and cause a panic unnecessarily, because there's already so much for people to deal with. You just don't want to be adding anything else on top of that, right? So that's kind of really where Tracker excelled, was by being able to see things in real time and then addressing them in real time and then putting out there as real time as possible. And that included all the information sources, whether it happened to be the Daily Mail or, unfortunately, in our case, at one point in time, it happened to be our own Hawaii County Civil Defense, right? So there was an era where they were really trying to control all information coming out and saying, no, you really should only listen to us. You shouldn't be listening to social media at all. And they put out this video message, which I'll play for you guys now.
But to get the factual information, you have to tune in to the Hawaii County Civil Defense to get the most latest information possible, because we do not want to create panic. But all of you understand that there's a lot of things that are happening. There's a lot of things happening on social media. In social media, it has its place. But in this particular situation, we do not want to create any panic to any of our constituents or the people of this island. Because we don't want to give wrong messages not only to our island, but to the rest of the country. Because what we're having right now is economical impact as people are trying to cancel their reservations in Kona and other parts of the island.
So that's a very telling video there, right? The last thing he mentions is economic impact on the island. We don't want to spread panic and scare people away from coming to visit the island, right? That's kind of where he's coming from. And it's interesting what the parallels are, today with the COVID pandemic, and we're worried about the economy as well, and we have to kind of balance the economy. And so, and he also mentioned, how social media can really spread misinformation. It can be really a dangerous thing, and we wholeheartedly agree, and that's why Tracker has to vet everything and moderate everything, right? And that's why that screening is so important, right? And so we completely agree there. The issue really comes when they start saying, well, all social media is bad and there isn't anything good there ever in any way, shape, or form, right? That's kind of part one of the problem. Then part two of the problem is when they go and put out their own alert, like this one right here, emergency alert, 10:17 p.m. on May 6th, Leilani subdivision south of Leilani between Kapuna and Mohala must exit through Pohoiki Road. Go now. Half hour later, radio DJ tweets out, I just spoke to Civil Defense. This was not an emergency. It was something to alert those inside to gather their belongings to leave, not an emergency. It sure sounds like an emergency, doesn't it? The way it was written with the big bold words, emergency alert at the top, right? So within half an hour, that was discredited. And that was an alert that was not put out, right? And we were able to, because we're monitoring things hour by hour, we could reconstruct what actually had happened. There had been a surge in lava earlier that day on May 6th, right? But it was not addressed timely. And by the time the alert was put out, everything was over and done for hours and hours. This upper map from May 6th here, you can see this kind of big blob in the middle. This is where the flow was surging out. That biggest lobe of lava was actually coming from the first opening at Fissure 8, believe it or not. And there was certainly some quick lava advancing in that era of time. But this little patch at the top of the arrow right up here, right next to the word hazardous, is a little red spot right in there. It's a little bit hard to see, but that was a spot that erupted on May 4th, Fissure 5 right here, right next to and partly underneath this road. And so when they put out this alert that says go through Pohoiki Road, they're telling people drive out across the top of this thing, right? So not only is there no emergency happening, they're sending people out the wrong way if there was an emergency happening. So it's a compounded problem here, right? And misinformation in this case is coming from our own authorities, right? That's what really did not help people's trust in them and trust in information. When it came time to getting information, it was quite often late or repetitive or nothing useful, right? And that was kind of a lot of the issue with that. It can come from every side, right? And that's another parallel we see today, right? Like, who do you believe? There's so much partisanship happening and politics getting involved in the middle of this disaster response, even today with the whole, coronavirus pandemic. This is really a tricky, slippery thing to be dealing with.
I think you're right on. And I think that the effects of this is that right now there's a lot of people who do not feel like there is anyone who has their back, who is in a position of power. And when that happens, a lot of people, because they don't have access to what they consider the truth, they don't have access to the information they need, they start looking at all sorts of conspiracy theories and thinking, oh, that must be true because it's from a different source, or for whatever reason. Conspiracy theories just start popping up because there's no truth. Whereas if you have something like Tracker, you can always go to that and you can say, okay, that's what is really the truth. I can hold on to that. They've got my back. But that right now, there's just so many people going so many different ways because they just don't have, they don't know which way to go because nobody is giving them the information.
Right. And it's inconsistent, right? You hear the exact opposite points of view put out routinely. You know, we need to keep things closed. We need to open things back up. We need to stay far away. We need to come closer together. So of course it's confusing, right? All right, let's move on and let's talk about how we can actually use social media for good and leverage it to actually be useful to people, right? Because that's what happened in 2018 is we ignored that warning. Okay, well, you guys think what you like, you know, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. And, you know, crowdsource information, you know, whether it's, you know, from aerial observations, on the ground observations, just kind of becoming that hub and information clearinghouse, right? To kind of get as much information from the public who's out there everywhere looking at everything all the time and bring it all back in, check it and share it out again. So like this is an example right here of a aerial photograph that was very timely during the advance of lava through Pohoiki Bay, right? And you can kind of see on the right image we have the lava has destroyed a lot of the area. Only a few houses and pieces of road left, and you can line those houses and road up, and you can superimpose them, and you can actually get an idea of where the flow is today. And that's what was really done here. You can see how far the flow is going into the bay, right around the corner up here. So you know, while the official response has their pipeline, their flow of information that's fairly bureaucratic and takes time to get through, right? You know, by having crowdsourced information, you can really mobilize much more quickly, right? As long as you have a team of fact checkers that can really keep things flowing, you know, at a good pace there. So that was really the strength of social media, was it really was able to get information and pass it out much faster than anyone else because it was being used by the people who were giving information, right? And we found all kinds of stories by people telling us what was going on, not only related to the eruption, but also to some of the other happenings in our community. And one really eye-opening example is a story of Matt Keller, Fire Chief from the Pacific Northwest, who was visiting Hawaii. And, you know, he's a tourist, right? He came to try to see what there was to see with the eruption. And this top image of the glow behind the palm trees, that's the image he took right before he was shot while sitting in his rental car, right? He was shot. You can see an x-ray of his hand there. His right hand was on his gear shift, right? You can kind of see the how the car is laid out there, right? I believe it might have been like a Mustang. He had his driver's side window was open, right? And a bullet came in over his shoulder, across his front, and embedded in his hand on a gear shift. So that could have easily hit him in the head. He was lucky not to have, you know, had more serious injury than actually being shot in the hand, right? And so this guy, he's a fire chief, right? So he's an emergency responder in his own community at home in the Pacific Northwest. So he's like, okay, well, I've been shot. You know, he calls the police. He drives to Long's Drugs, which is, you know, quarter mile from the police station, perhaps, you know, half mile from the police station. And he triages himself because that's part of his training. He knows how to take care of his wound, right? So he bandages himself up and he's waiting for the police. And after an hour and 10 minutes of waiting in Long's and bandaging himself, he's like, well, okay. He went back to his hotel in Hilo, presuming that the police department was just too busy with some lava-related emergency to respond to him, right? So he just said, okay, well, I'll just call him tomorrow and, you know, follow up. And so he calls him and follows up, but he has to essentially pull teeth, you know, one person after the other, until eventually he has got to send a letter from the Northwest back to our mayor and our police chief to actually get an investigation into this event actually to begin, right? And we reported on it, you know, like a month later, right, in Hawaii Tracker. And this is a story that didn't make any other news anywhere else, right? And at first we're going to dismiss it, like, oh, it's just probably someone saying. I think it came out of someone on some online content posted some snarky remark like, "Oh yeah, and while you're in Puna, don't get shot." And we're like, okay, well that's just probably bad rep for Puna, but because everything is fact checked and followed up on, and go and be like, okay, well, why do you say that? What's the evidence? And look at the evidence on your screen right here. This is what came out. This is what came back to us, right? You can see that the actual bullet, the center right, that was extracted from his hand after the fact, right, in Washington State, I believe. Yeah. So the point of all this is, social media can tell us. I mean, it's useful for everything, right? It can be useful for just regular crime, not just eruption response and disaster response, but it's something we really should embrace more and really could leverage much better, and respond much more quickly, right? Than in this case than never. Social media was getting information from all over the place, right? And one of the things that was really useful to us was people who were stationed in their houses, whatever corner of the community that happened to be in, and they'd go and look at the eruption and what they could see of the eruption from their same vantage point day after day after day after day, right? And so these became reliable sources for us because we knew where they were, we knew how often they were going, we could compare what they were telling us they were seeing to like pictures we had of what was going on at the time, and we can then verify how the observations actually matched to what we're seeing on the ground. And so I'm going to play you guys this little clip here. This is a time lapse taken from Uncle Victor's house, right as the surge of pool lava comes through. I believe this is May 26th in Fisher 6, and Fisher, this may be 16 over here. And so I'll play this. You guys can see how being in one place and seeing changes over time from one vantage point can be really useful. Whether it's minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day, week to week, all these different views of the same kind of process really can help you understand, okay, the variations have to do with how much gas is coming out. I see more gas coming out when a lot of flow is lower in the channel, or, things like that, for example, right? So we had a network of individuals, different homeowners that were all along this eruption area, right? Because the river of lava in the end was 8.5 miles long, and a lot of it was going through areas that there was nothing left where no one could really observe it except from the air. But wherever there were still houses left, people were sheltering in place. They were able to report back, okay, well, here's what's happening with the river at mile 5 or mile 4 or mile 3 or mile 2 or mile 1. We could kind of get a picture comprehensively of this wide 8-mile area based on many individual reports that were trustworthy, people who we knew had gone and seen that same river every day this week, and so they knew, oh yeah, it really is higher today, and it's not just what you think you saw.
It became so critical for the people who were putting it together, you included, to have the information from all these different sources, because during a lot of that time, those were the only people who could get in there, and the rest of it had to be done from the air because nobody else was doing it. All of those people together had not given you the information. You couldn't have had reporting that you did be as accurate as it was.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there was just so much going on all the time, right? It was, it was a full-time job just to collect pictures. It was a full-time job just to, watch the upper part of the fissures. A full-time job to interpret information and try to pass information on to people. There was so many different aspects of it, so many different cogs in the wheel, right? That were really important, right? And and you're absolutely right. Without the aerial support, there would have been a lot less that we could have done and known, right? And so let's turn to that now, right? And there was a whole group of people, right, including your husband Scott Wilson, who with Aloha Skies Aviation was flying the Cessna. You see at the top of the picture right there, and was one of our most reliable and most frequent contributors of providing information to the public, right? And it was as simple as having photographs of the same place different times, right? And there were times when Scott might have flown, it seems like 4 or 5 times a day, right? And every single time he'd take some pictures, and we'd be able to see where the flow front was, at 8 a.m. and then at 10 a.m. and then at 1 p.m. and then at 3 p.m. and then at 7 p.m., right? And we know the USGS was flying maybe once a day, and the county was flying maybe once a day, and maybe the National Guard got a flight in a day also, or maybe 2 flights a day, but there really wasn't enough continuity of coverage from the air, from official sources, that by the end of the eruption, we knew that the USGS was relying on Scott's pictures, actually. Scott's pictures and Mick and Bruce over here in the bottom right at the helicopter, with extreme exposure and tropical visions and Paradise helicopters, right? Also contributing, with live video streams, photographs, video process after the fact, and a lot of the other clients that were up on here as well on the plane, right? Also sharing their photos and accounts, but what was most useful was the pilots themselves, right? Again, same pattern, right? The same trustworthy source of information, and get information from the same point of view, again and again and again and again. In this case, from the air. And that allowed us to really see things like you guys can see in the center of the image here. 2 views of Fissure 8, the top middle one, right, is the one during a surge where the lava is spilling out at the channel and sending this big sheet of lava out in every direction from its little holding area there to the bottom left. And in the bottom picture, you can see it's during a lull, right, where nothing's spilling out, everything's contained in the channel. The lava doesn't even look as bright or as hot. Yeah, so area support was really crucial. What was it like for you, Lei, being a little more involved in the family side, of someone flying, almost all the time up in the air over the eruption?
But what we found out is that he always wished he could have the experiences I was having on the ground, and I always thought maybe it would be good to be able to go up in the air and do what he was doing, and we all got everything done. I mean, it wasn't one is better than the other. It was all of them were necessary. He was necessary for taking the pictures. I was necessary. You were necessary. Everybody that was there was necessary for doing what they were doing.
Yeah, good way to put it. Yeah, it's interesting insight. Yeah, I mean, we all kind of wish we could do a little bit more and a little bit of everything maybe, but in the end, it was really kind of sticking to our jobs. Once we're setting them to just keep the machine moving, right? Keep things flowing, keep information coming. Yeah, so yeah, aerial sport was a big part of it. Information, and it also was involved in animal rescues, right, which I touched on a little bit earlier. And so animal rescues happened, a lot of them on the ground. The aerial part of it is just one aspect of it. I can talk about that first, right? The most dramatic part of it was this, cattle rescue with air support, where the lava had kind of come around a pasture area and essentially closed it in on all sides. And so we had a herd that was isolated, on a shrinking island of lava kind of encroaching on the sides. And so this operation that was put together, Paradise Helicopters was able to it was one of the more dramatic ones to rescue the cattle out of there, right? And obviously got a lot of press because of that. But it was only like, the most dramatic one, and really a lot of the other rescues were equally as much, if not more work, right? It's hard to say that when someone's like dragging a cow through the air in a net off a helicopter, right? But like to find someone's pet in the bushes took sometimes a dozen trips. People were going in there over and over and over and over and over again, and setting traps with food for these animals that didn't have any more food because their house wasn't there, or they couldn't get to their house from where they had wandered off to or been scared off to by whether it be lava or fire or something that caused them to flee, right? And so people would set out traps and go and collect the cats and hike them back across the lava in their cages, right? And then bring them to the vets. And it was a huge, I'm sure I can't do justice to the efforts that were done to care for, recover as many animals as possible, cats, dogs, right? Some of our more famous personalities are here in the middle of the image, right? We have Koa the lava horse, right? That was evacuated as well. And Merlin the dog was there he is, a white dog laying on the ground. A Pohoiki boat ramp was rescued by sea, right? So animals were rescued by land, by sea, and by air. All of them. There was a whole story of how animal rescues progressed, right? You have community trying to mobilize and get support. Axel Credo is a big part of it as well.
He knew that the animals were out, that the cattle were out there, and he knew that they were very much in danger of dying of starvation, of not having enough water, of the not being able to breathe because of the SO2, and that these cattle were in very, very dire straits. And he wanted to get them out of there. So he went to the Humane Society, and the Humane Society wouldn't even give him the time of day. So he went and he made the entire plan. He found the people, the KIA people on Maui who did pig hunting with the nets, and he called them and he said, hey, can we use that here? And so he did this with every single detail down to the planning the flight and how the flight needed to go and what needed to be done, get the volunteers together, warn them, hey, these cows could be in all sorts of interesting straits. We have no idea what's going to happen when they get down here, but can you help us anyway? And he got everything together. He made the plan. He took it to the Humane Society. This time he said, those cattle need to be out of here. Here's the plan. You can take the credit as long as we get the cows out of there. And the Humane Society said, sure, go ahead and do it. And they did take the credit for it, but it was actually Axel's work that did it.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, so Axel's another hero of our community that really, went above and beyond to rescue as many animals as possible, right? And, there are many other people who, like I said, we can't mention everybody. I can't remember everybody's names, honestly, right? There's so many people who were involved in all of this. At the time, it's hard to kind of put myself back in that state of mind, I mean, I was fairly eruption focused at the time also, but it was, it's really, really disturbing to just think about how many pets were left behind and how powerless we were, right, over the ones that were lost already. And it felt like really worth it to put extra energy into saving the ones that we could, right? Because I don't know if that's just a human thing or, wanting to make up for the failures of, the weeks before or what have you, right? But it seemed very worthwhile, and it was, an inspiration to a lot of us, it was something to do also, right? Something to keep our minds, something productive we could do to help people, rather than just, sit around and watch things get covered by lava, right? It was a really important aspect, I think, action to take for people, right? Because there was a lot of tragedy as well, right? There were the turtles in the ponds that no one rescued, and the lava just, took who knows how many, right? And there was the whole blame game afterwards and the whole fiasco that is not really, pleasant to dwell on very much, but there was, the endorsed search and rescue for Sweetie, the three-legged dog, right? And the owner, after they were flown by a helicopter, that's how you could get in there to look for things, right? And once they were flown in there, they got cited for looking for their dog, even though they had permission ahead of time, right? It's like, for being in an evacuation zone, right? So the lack of organization, right, and the extra suffering and pain that was caused, right? Court cases and having to argue, your right to be there to try to rescue your dog, and on top of it, the dog's never found, right? So I mean, what a terrible situation, I mean. So I think it really was important to really, every single pet we can get, let's go for them. Let's get them, right? Because, as many as possible, right? Weren't really given the attention by the county and the authorities that the people were, right?
We have to remember too, though, that a lot of those people didn't leave their pets behind by choice. I mean, like I said, when they come through with blaring horns at 2 o'clock in the morning and they say, you got 5 minutes to get out. First of all, the pets are scared to death and they're zipping everywhere trying to find some place that's safe away from this noise. And the people who have them, they're grabbing what they can. They don't have time to go and search for the pets at that point in time. It wasn't necessarily their fault that the animals were there and they were separated from the animals. But what the main thing was, we wanted to go in and help them if we could. And we wanted to get the pets out, as many of them as we could. And that was what was behind the animal rescues more than anything else, is just helping the pets.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. Yeah, there's no judgment on the people who, were forced to abandon their pets, right? Like, imagine you have an outdoor cat that's essentially impossible to get them, and that's not even mentioning the explosions that were happening and the ground that was shaking and the smell of smoke in the air all the time, right? I mean, these pets were freaked out already, right? And then to try to try to corral them in a last minute situation. It was, you know, I suppose in hindsight we might have wished that we had taken everyone out of there like 2 weeks ahead of time, and, you know, had time to go back for, oh, I forgot my, you know, my bracelet that's, you know, particularly meaningful to me or whatever. I can go back for that, you know, as opposed to, okay, it's all or nothing right now, right? So on reflection, I think we probably all wish that, right? So, but a lot of good work was done with the animals, and, you know, that's kind of something we, you know, needs to be documented as well, you know, as part of the response of the community in 2018, right? It was a, you know, important aspect, and, you know, these are family members of our evacuees, you know, and, you know, I have an issue with, you know, our judging the standard by lack of human deaths, right? You know, we say, oh, no humans died, therefore we did a great job at the response, and, well, I bet you anybody who has a pet that was lost will heartily disagree with you, right? It's just as important as any other family member, right? Whether they're human or not. So one aspect of the community, yeah, definitely needs to be mentioned. You know, like I said, it deserves more than one slide. Like, we really have a whole presentation just on this aspect of it, but I think we have to move on, because so much happened with the community in 2018. There were so many different aspects and facets of it that, you know, that the people contributed, you know, all the way from animal rescues, you know, to the eruption updates, you know, even more of the actual citizen science, like, you know, investigating some of the issues that we're observing in the field, right? So one I'd like to talk about is the depth of the channel, right? The issue of the channel depth. And I'll play you guys this video on loop here. This is showing a lava raft, right? This is a piece of rock that came off at the edge of the channel, and it's kind of got carried by the lava, and it's being pushed along. And what you can see is it was fully submerged, and then it actually emerged out of the lava. And now you guys can see a video of before and after. Lava levels dropped in one part of the braided channel as well. So the issue really was that we were having to check the reports of how much lava is coming out of the ground that USGS was providing. And when we did calculations, you know, kind of matching their volumes that they were reporting with what we knew of the width of the channel and the length of the channel, it meant that their volumes meant that the channel depth could only be 3 or 4 or 5 feet deep. And why does that matter? Because if that's the case, then your estimate of amount of lava coming out is off by a whole order of magnitude, right? It might have been, you know, 2, 5, 10 times more lava coming out than we actually realized at the time. And that matters when you're trying to respond, and, you know, like, how long is it going to take to get somewhere, and how fast is it going to overrun a community, and how much time you need to evacuate, and all those things, right? So, I mean, we never till later do we really understand, like, you know, how deep the channel actually was, right? And even now it's hard to tell, because the very last lava that was flowing in the channel froze in place, and you can kind of still see the margins, the banks of it, but everything inside that's frozen is not exposing the bottom of the thing anymore, even today. So we still don't know how deep it actually was, but it was deep enough to carry these gigantic boulders, submerge them entirely, and have them re-emerge out of the flow. And that was really an insightful thing that we were able to share with the USGS, you know, and with our community as well. And, you know, we're able to, from that, be able to say, okay, well, that means that the volume of lava in the channel is so great. If one of these big boulders actually blocks it at some point, the amount of lava that can jump the banks and come out is going to advance very quickly, because the volume is so great based on these observations, right? So, you know, we kind of kept updating observations, whether it was lava channel depth, the USGS official signals. Here's a tilt meter on the left, you know, showing the collapse events at the summit of the volcano, which we then later learned corresponded to surges in Fissure 8 in the later parts of the eruption. We were able to take USGS thermal maps, like you guys can see here in the top right. We've animated them to kind of show the progression of the flow over time. Right, so we're able to kind of just take that information that was being put out by official channels and then explain it to people, present it in new and novel ways, right? Earthquakes are always a big part of things, keeping track of where the earthquakes were, if there were new ones. People were, you know, were very jumpy, right? So any new earthquake, oh, is the ground going to open up underneath my house now? Is lava going to come out over here, even though I live 3 miles away from where lava's coming out of the ground now? People just didn't have any confidence that wasn't going to happen. And so kind of every day checking the signals and saying, okay, this is a pattern, we see it, this is what it means, this was happening, it's happening again, these are the patterns are holding, it seems likely to stay, or it's unstable, things might change, and those kind of things were our kind of guiding principles to inform from official sources during the eruption there. Is there anything that you'd like to add, that, as a viewer, Lay? Like for me, I was often behind a camera on this part of it, so I have like a lens, right, that I see this through, and I'm kind of curious, like what someone who was more out in the public might have seen from these reports.
Well, we all relied very heavily on, it's one thing to listen to or look at or read what USGS is putting out. It's another thing altogether to understand it and to have somebody who could interpret it for us, that made it so that we could actually use the information that was there, was so critical. And that continues today. There's a lot of stuff out there, but what we really need is somebody who makes it useful, which I think is what the people who are like the head of CDC and the head of the virus team right now. I think that's what, more than anything else, what the people need is somebody they can trust, somebody they can rely on to be there for them, be there telling them the truth, but somebody who's making it so that they can understand what the truth is, and so they can make better decisions.
Absolutely. So we also want to make sure we mention the Volcano Village community, which is not where the lava was coming out of the ground, but is closer to the source of the collapses of the summit of the volcano. And there, the earthquakes were constant. Most of the day, the ground would be shaking pretty well. Then you'd have one big collapse, usually measured about a 5.2, 5.3 in a Richter scale. And then you might get 2 to 4 hours of quiet afterwards. And so people in Volcano Village were actually very on edge until that big earthquake hit. And it was on average every 24 hours early on, and it moved to 48 or to 28 hours, and eventually got down to around 40 hours, right? But like it was about once a day, especially in the early part of it, when it was really something people were dealing with on a daily basis, and it was new and it was the most stressful. It was like every 24 hours. And so whenever the earthquake would happen, they would say, okay, relax, try to get as much sleep as possible before the shaking starts again. No matter what time of the day that happened to be, sometimes you wouldn't go to sleep until 3 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes you'd go to sleep at 8 p.m. because that's just when you could sleep. That's how people did it. No, not so much me, because I didn't spend much time in the volcano area. I was more deployed to the eruption site, right, at the hub. But, everyone in my neighborhood, especially, guys in tracker group like Ken Boyer, who shot this video I'm going to show you guys. This is his garage. And he actually, these things that happen so frequently, they were so predictably going to happen every day. He was able to set up a camera and actually catch an event, right? And it's after several tries, and you can imagine like how long a camera is running for and all the different logistical issues, right? But anyways, here's a video he actually captured of this 5.3 earthquake hitting his garage in Volcano Village.
Wow. Yeah. You think that was a 5.3 for the day? Still shaking, wow. Whew. That's like a tough one to stand up for. Had to grab one of the toolbox over here.
That's every day. That's how it was, right? So, that's a whole other chapter, right? And, there's a lot of, amazing, fascinating, touching stories of people's experiences in Volcano that were put out that, can showcase some other time. But, we have to mention Volcano Village as part of this community response, because things were happening in Volcano as well, and they're still also dealing with the response now. This very garage, was damaged by these earthquakes, so, the recovery is still ongoing.
The volcano affected the economics, even up there in Volcano, was maybe not quite as bad because not so many people lost their homes, but the businesses had to shut down. They pretty much lost all of their business, very much the same as it was in Pāhoa, and also the same as it is now. And those impacts cannot be minimized for how much stress they cause to the people.
While we have amazing things to see, at the volcano, it's a whole new landscape. I think it's more amazing than ever. But there is no red glow to see, and there is no red lava to see, and so it's something that the tourism industry has struggled with a little bit as well, right? How to kind of rebrand and remarket when for so long they depended on lava being the light that drew the tourists in. And so, the work continued, right? More forecasting as eruption kind of came to an end. I mentioned that intervals between collapses and volcano were getting longer and longer. The forecasting adapted as well.
How long would you think this flow go on?
That's a tough question. I think at the beginning we were saying in a range of 1 to 3 months. I right now don't see any reason to change that forecast.
Could Fisher 8 become the next Pohoa, you think?
It's hard for us to say, well, based on what's happening so far, that it's going to be an event that's going to last 35 years. 55 was 87 days, right?
Yeah,
we're in a 40, so you hate to see it, this might only be halfway there. And until we get to that really at least 3-month point, that's kind of still out of play. There's some big boulders within the flow that you don't actually see. Right. If one of those is wedged in any particular spot, then you can start diverting the flow. So that's kind of where the real danger probably lies. Yeah. A piece of the channel wall from somewhere up the stream has blocked one of the sections of the braided channel, forcing all the channel to one side of the river. It doesn't all fit in there, it's overflowing, and that's diverting a huge amount of the flow out of the banks of the channel today. It seems like the flows that are all in here will probably come down. This flow is going to want to go right along the side of this last one that just came out right here. It goes right to the edge of Ahalanui and Kokala and Secrets.
All of Kokala and Ahalanui Beach Park and all of that is all gone.
The pressure of that lava underwater, all the gases releasing at once, caused a huge explosion that came up through the water. And that's why anyone on a boat tour is required by the Coast Guard to stay 100 meters offshore, is because of this exact kind of thing happening.
23 people were injured.
Everyone was affected, yeah.
Yeah.
Once you get past this ridge right here, then it's downhill right into the boat ramp area. Even though the flow may not come up in this direction, it may actually from the coastline be able to work its way in a little ribbon in this direction. That's what the fear actually is, that it could actually happen there. Here's an active flow. You guys can see the area of concern is because the lava is actually working out along the coast from the ocean entry towards the boat ramp. Yeah, so there's a story of lava flows following the descent lines and following some more subtle changes. It was in some ways it was good to be able to anticipate lava was going to come and take the warm pond and threaten Pohoiki, but in some ways it was also, a real bummer to, just see it as an inevitable thing that, we couldn't change it, right? We could just watch it. We could see it was heading there. You could just waiting for the word, right? And, and in hindsight, the story of Ahalanui, the worm ponds, is much different than one of Pohoiki, because Pohoiki, we keep thinking it's going to be gone, it's going to be gone, it's going to be gone. And here in its very last image, right, we see the lava right next to Pohoiki. We thought the lava was going to take Pohoiki, and it never did. And of course, the story evolves from there. There's the post-eruption chapter of the sand we'll talk about here shortly as well. But right, it was, what a trip to see that happening and see it play out, and know where the flow is going, and be on the boat with Ikaika, and then look over and you see, well, yeah, it's gone. And as far as the Ahalanui, yeah, what was it like watching those streams from Homely?
It was, we were glad to have the information. We were glad it was accurate, but it was such a sad time. That time was, I don't know anybody in the entire area who was not affected by it. And I think a lot of people sort of wished they could have seen it one more time, or, the closest we had was have pictures of it. To actually see what it now looked like, or what wasn't there anymore. That was the saddest part of the entire eruption.
Yeah, it really was, yeah. Because, from the moment the channel broke its banks, which we had been concerned about and, had warned about, and, it actually came to pass. And, once that happened, the flow traversed to the ocean, and it was, 2 days, right? 2 days. Maybe even less than that. It was such a fast thing that happened. It was safe, and maybe the flow wasn't going to get it, and suddenly, okay, there's just no hope. It's coming right for it, right? Because the original flow was coming from the east and was trying to kind of work its way over around the coast, and then suddenly that just shut off, and a new flow came from the other direction and took it all out. Quite a thing to be part of, and just following those USGS blue lines and helping people understand what that meant, right? To have time to make your peace, even if you couldn't physically go there, to think, okay, well, let's keep our thoughts with Halanui, let's keep our thoughts with Pohoiki, and as much as anything else, it was a shared experience for us, right? To all go through that together, to kind of wait and see the results together, and to ride the roller coaster, like the highs, the lows, the crashes, or whatever it may be, like all together, right? So that was something that really brought us together and strengthened us, right? And really helped our resolve in other aspects of the eruption as well when it came time to helping our fellow man and kind of overcome the natural disaster, right? And all the other aspects of the eruption as well. So the eruption was coming to an end. It wasn't for sure, but we've been doing analysis, right? Here's Dane's analysis from Hawaii Tracker, published on July 27th. This is about a week before the last collapse. And, we're pointing out, the collapse intervals are getting longer and longer and longer, after having gotten shorter and shorter and shorter initially. And so that implied that something was changing, and it implied a likely end, or at least suggested a possibility of one, right? If someone doesn't want to be strong with their wording. But here it is. It was put out to the public, look, we see this happening, we're waiting for more data. And if the data only comes in one new data point every 2 days, it takes a few weeks for the data to really be believable. And so it really took until July 27th to really say what had been on people's minds in Hawaii Tracker for 2 or 3 weeks before that already, actually. Since right after 4th of July, people were saying, hey, something's a little different now. What's going on? And no one was really quite convinced until we waited long enough to have enough data. And there's another way that the forecasting manifested during the eruption. As far as economic response, there was a lot of things that happened. The national park did reopen after 4 months. 4 months was actually a fairly short closure. We thought I was impressed considering how much damage occurred. Right, all those earthquakes, 62 different 5.3 events. Right, cracked everything, all the roads, all the water pipes. Right, all facilities, not just visitors, but all the office facilities. Roads, trails collapse, landslides off all the cliffs and craters. A huge amount of work that's been done. And it's open in parts, but they were able to reopen initially that first phase in September 22nd, right? And that was a huge boon for a volcano, right, that was already suffering because of the lack of tourists. And like I said, they didn't all come back flooding back, but every little bit helps, right? It's just like now, every little bit helps. One other thing that the national park did to help was they took the exhibits from the now closed, damaged Jagger Museum in conjunction with the Pāhoa Main Street Association. We're able to open a lava museum in Pāhoa and relocate those exhibits to Pāhoa to try to improve visitation in Pāhoa, right? To help each other out with this economic challenge, right? Because there had been so many cruise ships canceled, tours canceled, even people canceling trips to Oahu, despite the fact the eruption was happening on our island, 2 islands away, right? Just the fact that the misinformation or the lack of understanding or awareness, whatever it happened to be, like the whole economy statewide took a hit from this eruption, right? We're still assessing, we're still recovering, we're still putting money in to repair things, and so the actual final tally is still to be determined in the end. But we do know that the farming lost $28 million, just like as far as the orchids and anthuriums and all the different, farming industry, right? As well as papayas, everything else, noni. Within the national park community itself, and only there, $94 million in economic loss, right, from 4 months of closure, right? That's just one little village, right? So imagine Pāhoa. I haven't seen a number for Pāhoa, but it's another huge number, also much bigger than that probably, right? Considering that all the bed and breakfasts are gone, they don't exist anymore, right? All the places people used to go, the parks, the places that used to go swimming, that's all gone, right? It's not like the park is still there and it's just closed and you can reopen it some days. It's just gone in Puna, so it's a little bit different there. But in following the theme of the day here, right, and the community stood up for itself once again and decided to try to celebrate itself and mobilize itself. And so this the biggest image here at the bottom is the Pāhoa Block Party in July 2018. While the eruption is still ongoing, in the last few weeks of the eruption, you can see the huge red glow in the sky, and everyone's out and about because they need it. They need to connect with each other. They need to celebrate the good things, positives of life, right? To like support each other, support each other, physically and emotionally through music, and just almost like in communion, at this event, right? And support the local economy as well. And were you there, Lay?
I was there. People don't like change, but change is constant. They wanted something that felt, quote, normal, even though they knew that there would not be the same normal as there had been before. But they wanted to feel like there was some floor under their feet, something supporting them. And I think that's what a lot of people are going through right now as we're dealing with a new normal in the entire world. And what is that going to be like? Do we still have a floor under our feet, so to speak? And we don't know that yet. But it feels very disconcerting for a lot of people because they don't know. And that's what was happening there. And they needed that block party to be able to have, okay, it's going to be okay. We're going to be fine.
It was a really important moment. And, I have to think a moment like this is coming for us at some point in the future, right? Like once everyone is let out of their houses again, and the next Pāhoa block party won't have red glow in the sky, but people will probably be just as happy to see each other as they were when this photograph was taken, I think.
I'm sure of it.
So that's interesting, right? We can kind of look back on 2018 and, realize that this is a phase that we have still yet to encounter in 2020 in our current crisis, right? The coming together and solidarity phase, right? We just seem so fragmented today as a society, right? We're all over the place still and not sure which way to turn. We're still kind of reacting in a lot of ways, yeah. So the story of Pohoiki, we'll finish that for you guys, So Pohoiki, even though the lava didn't actually get it, the sand came in. This is a picture on the top from August 2018. You can see the boat ramp. The pier is here next to this is now a landlocked pond, right? This sand berm washed across the mouth of it and blocked it in. And, that made the boat ramp unusable very early on in August 2018. And a year later, August 2019, you guys can see like how much wider the sand actually is in that area, right? It's filled in a huge area, and the boat ramp is even more landlocked now. And of course, this was an issue then because it's a very productive harbor. I believe the second or third most productive harbor in the entire state of Hawaii, as far as the fishing. And it's been out of commission since August 2018, right? And here we are speaking on 2020, right? At a time when we know that our systems are under strain and we're on an island that's remote, thinking about sustainability for ourselves and how we can buffer ourselves against some of these disruptions in a global economy, whether it's shipping for us especially, right, and wanting to have more food available close by. We still have a boat ramp that's unusable, unfortunately, and we'd be catching all the fish to help sustain our economy. It's something we really like to see movement on, and we're still, as a community, pushing as we can. It's just a very slow process to try to get that done. And hopefully, sooner than later, hopefully we can take, the lessons of 2018, combine them with the lessons of 2020, and realize, like all of these strains in our system are opportunities for us to take steps forward, right? And like improving our society and making it more robust and more self-sustainable, right? And like reopening this boat ramp would be awesome to reestablish that supply of fish, right? And not have to worry about a whole bunch of food coming from elsewhere. We'll have to probably export it back again, once again. Dana's actually done a lot of work since then and has mapped out, from compiling drone imagery, the progression of sand over the last couple of years as it's moved to the south, with the current kind of dragging it from this big red area at the top as the lava flows themselves, and then you can kind of see the sand is piling and filling in what used to be the ocean in the shallow bays, and it's now extending something like a half mile down shore, right? And just creeping, right? So there's the whole sequence right there. Have you been to Pohoiki recently, Lay?
I have been there a couple of times. The first time I went back was right after they allowed us back in. And it was a very healing moment for a lot of people to be able to get there and to see it and just to feel the new energy of it. Since then, it's kind of mellowed out a little bit, but there's a sense there of, yes, there's a lot of new, but there's also something missing yet. And I believe the sense of the community needs to have something like the boat ramp, even if it's not in that place, even if it's somewhere else, but they need to have that boat ramp as part of the continuity of the community.
Yeah, and Pohoiki was, it was so much, right? It was a boat ramp, it was a swim area, it was like a gathering place, right? Some people might from the outside look and say, oh, look, there's a huge black sand beach. It looks really nice, I mean, and yeah, it's nice to be on a beach there, right? But it's not a great place for swimming anymore. It's not a place where kids can swim,
It's not a place where I swim.
Yeah, it's not a place where boats can get in the water, It was one of the best surf areas, right? And like most of the surf spots are gone. There's still maybe one or two still, that are evolving, but there's a large sense of loss is what I kind of feel, that from the community is still today because of the loss of the boat ramp and the swimming and the surfing, even though we do have sand now and, we can enjoy the sand, but it's not the same as losing swimming, boating, and surfing. Once again, Dane DuPont, one of our heavy hitters, is really doing science here and documenting the science of the progression of sand, right? So this is actually another citizen science initiative that's being maintained now, right? And it just kind of postscript here, right? It seems like the sand building is stabilized a little bit, and what we have seems to be what we're going to have for a while now. It seems like it's that amount of sand is going to stay there, and it's kind of collected, and there's a little bit of a shelf a little bit offshore in a bay, and that seems to be what's holding the sand in to the point where it is now. So it seems like we're going to be like the beach is here to stay for a while. Yeah, and that's something that that the science is really documenting. And so to mention another one of our citizen scientists, I'd like to turn to some of the work that Harry Durgan has done, right? And Harry was instrumental throughout the whole eruption, not only with what he still does today, providing weather forecasts and, weather monitoring, because there was quite a lot of weather from this eruption that was caused by the thermal effects, right? Huge rainstorms would pour, 12 inches in one day within a 1 mile radius, and you cross the wall and it didn't rain, which is really mind-boggling, right? That was an important aspect that was also, at times threatening to us, right, Leigh?
Well, the thing about the rain was that not only was it rain, but it was acid rain. It had all the SO2 and such in it. And so it was rain that could eat any kind of metal. And a lot of issues have come up because of that sense. But then right on the heels of all of this, to get hit by two, well, they were hurricanes and maybe they were tropical storms when they hit us. But, 53 inches in 4 days, that's kind of a lot if you've just been through a huge eruption. And
absolutely.
It was another blow to the community, but it was also another chance for us to come together and continue to help the people who needed it most. And we did.
Right. By that point, we were essentially forged, right? We were tempered by that point, and we're still bonded together. And, it's just, okay, what's next? What's next, right? Here comes Hector. Okay, here comes Lane. Okay, there's a little bit more lava in the pit. Okay, and, that's what this image on the bottom right here shows, right? Is in that resurgence of lava in September that Harry caught on his webcams that he was deploying, right? We were deploying webcams where USGS coverage had failed, right? Because they had the PG cam at the PGV site that when a brush fire came through in late July, it actually burned all the cables and that camera went offline. And so this one, the lava cam, was put online to kind of replace it and was crucial to catch that interval in September where the USGS camera was not online, right? So there have been reports from the helicopters as well, and there were other signs as well. But in the end, this was a small resurgence. It wasn't a reactivation by any means. It was kind of like a last little burp. But it was still one that was concerning for a lot of people when they saw a glow and they saw reports of, I saw more gas coming out or smelled things coming out as well, right? So that was an important part. And, to mention as well, we had other webcams that we deployed that we did not make public that we would use for monitoring eruption as well. So if someone would tell us, oh, the flow has come to the so-and-so point, we could go and look at one of our private hidden webcams, which the landowners would give us permission to mount at their house. but because of security issues, they wouldn't necessarily want everyone to know what their house looked like at every point in time, right? So we'd keep those to ourselves. And so, but we could check and say, okay, the flow is not that far. It's not to this street. It's not to that street. And so we actually use that as our data source as well. And that was hugely, hugely helpful. And Harry not only went and mounted them, in this case, you can see this photograph right in the middle. He built this whole scaffold to get the camera high enough to be able to see the glow. And, like this is, it's amazing stuff, right? He was designing the cages to house the cameras in and writing the software and, the transmission to actually update it in real time and all the protocols, all of that. Harry did all of that. And another huge initiative by a very important citizen scientist of our community. The thermal plates that were installed in Highway 130 to cover the cracks, right? So I put a little graph here at the top right that shows an automatic computer detection of the hottest temperature, so people could actually then see what the temperature was doing on the ground without having to check the webcam every minute. Yeah, so all different kinds of ways that Harry contributed.
He did that and gave us much more accurate weather forecasts than any of the other sources available, partly because he was part of the community and he is from Puna, but partly because he also wanted to do the same thing as Tracker and keep us not only informed, but help us to understand it and help us to understand why the weather was doing what it was doing, which was very, very crucial.
Yeah, shout out to Harry as well, and to Mouse and, all the different crew. And so, one of the last things of citizen science here is, like as the eruption was over, was monitoring the heat coming out of the ground, right? Because even after the eruption was over, people were still feeling heat from the ground and seeing steam after big rains, right? Those 2 storms came through and poured a bunch of water on really hot ground, and it was steaming for a long time, and the gas was stinky, right? And it was still seemed corrosive and harmful even in that very heavy steam era, when eruption was very freshly over, right? I'll play here a video taken from a drone of monitoring the new road that was put in. This is the new Highway 132, and kind of showing the hottest temperatures. Zoomed in on the right side here, right? You can see 120. We actually found as hot, not from the air, but as hot as 600 degrees. For people who had actually had their houses survive the eruption, right? It was a whole different path to recover than those that lost their houses. Those that lost their houses essentially early on could kind of move on and, okay, what's next? I know I'm not going back to that house. That chapter's over. Where am I going to go live now? And so that was a huge challenge for people. But once they crossed that bridge, they didn't have to really look back so much, right? Whereas people who had houses that survived right next to the flow until the very end and were still around today, every single day they're like, oh, is it coming? 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 Every single day it was closer, not so close, or closer, not so close. And then once the flow stopped, now they have to deal with all the damage of all the gases, right? And the ground shaking and the earthquakes and all, to repair and live in a new environment all around this. And the ground is now hotter than it was before, and it's gassier and it's stinkier. And what does this mean? Is it safe to be here? And like, oh God, I've got kids in the house. Should my kids even be here? Right? Is it safe to be here? Like, those are questions that we still hear today, and we're able to address them. USGS has done a pretty good job of also going and explaining to people what's happening in a longer term monitoring. But early on, we were in there the week after that, because people wanted to know right away, like, well, what's happening now? I can't wait for the USGS to come down here. We need to know now. And so we'd go to individuals' yards and say, okay, well, here's what your yard looks like, and here's what it looks like, here's what we suggest, and who knows? And then we kind of go from there, and then USGS would come out and give more guidance, and we'd share that with them as well. And kind of that's one other part of the science that was done, to kind of complement what was being done by the officials as well, kind of in the tailing end of the eruption here. So to kind of, wrap up just the science part of it, right? The citizen science kind of falls into 2 categories as far as I see it, right? The communication side of things, where we're able to explain, reiterate, restate information that was given by USGS HVO, by the Civil Defense, by the National Park, things that were published in the past, all the literature that we as scientists rely on to, do our research. Also, all the live data online on the website, live maps, the live earthquakes, tilt, all that kind of information. And then also, explaining to people that when USGS says, okay, there's a dike is intruding the East Rift Zone, means magma is pushing its way through a crack towards Leilani, right? States the same information, but a person who's not a geologist doesn't know what a dike is, doesn't know what an intrusion is, doesn't know where the East Rift Zone starts or ends potentially, right? So it's very different to say under Leilani and it's magma, and this is what happens before lava comes out of the ground, without even saying the word eruption potentially, right? This is what it actually physically means, and not getting caught up in the lingo, right? Which is necessary for scientific communication, but is not useful for a layperson trying to run away from this thing and plan what to do, how to respond, how to restructure their lives to adapt to this new reality. So yeah, that was a big part of it, putting things in lay terms, but also just passing on the alerts, right? There's a new brush fire, a new flow is heading this direction. There's a thunderstorm happening. The gas is particularly bad today, or the wind is blowing it in a particular direction, and it's really bad in a particular part of the neighborhood because the gases are so concentrated. Or there's a new fissure and it's really gassy, or whatever that was. Just relaying information, communicating basically like, here is what's happening. I'll tell you again and again and again and again about it, right? And one thing you mentioned touched on earlier, Lei, was the mental health aspect, right? And all the different aspects that run into that. But one part of that is just having people have an open channel of communication to you, just telling you what's happening, almost like you're narrating a sports game, right? Here's what's happening now, and here's what's happening now, and here's what's happening now, so that you can be paying attention to something else, have your focus on something else, and then be able to still be in tune enough to know, okay, well, everything's okay here. I have the space and the time to deal with what I need to deal with over here, right? And then the last thing was the rumors, of course, right? Rumors, whether they came from, mostly other media organizations, but also fact-checking our own authorities when they were putting out information that was contrary to what we were knowledgeable about on the ground. So the other part of this is the actual production of information, right? So not only were we parroting everything that was happening from the authorities, but we were also trying to help fill the gaps by producing more information. And, this is information that wouldn't have been accessible or available without citizen scientists doing their work, right? So things like actual video productions, having whether it's a half hour or 1 hour video broadcast people could tune into, like that replace the news, because the news stations that were covering this were out of Honolulu, right? For those who are not from the island, we don't have local news stations on the island. Everything's in Honolulu, 2 islands away. So they also cover what's happening in the city of Honolulu as well as what's happening in Puna. So like Puna is just like a subcategory, or only one part of the broadcast, whereas everything else in the broadcast doesn't relate to anyone else in Puna, right? So having a different production that was Puna specific or even beyond specific is a very, very useful thing to have, right? That should be done in the future, right? So the broadcast, that's definitely a big part of it. The community mapping projects, like actually mapping what houses were lost in real time, mapping where the flow was in real time, right? More frequently than official reports, right? Also, new information that wouldn't have been existed without people actually doing work, producing new information. Photographs from the air, we wouldn't have those if Scott and Mick and Bruce hadn't pushed the click button on a camera and shared them with everyone else online and let us study the pictures and see what was happening, what was changing as well, right? The actual forecasting, right? Actually, translating, this blue line actually means the flow is going to come here and it's going to go there and it's going to go there, and this flow, we don't know how long it's going to last, but it may actually last 3 months, because in 55, that's how long it did last, was 3 months. And so you should plan for it to be 3 months. And, that's something that no one else was saying, at the time. Even though people were scared to say, well, it might only last a day, it might last 3 months, it might last 30 years. No one really knew. But just having some guidance like, hey, plan for it to be several months and go from there. Right, that's something that no one else was saying. Webcams that replaced USGS ones that had failed. Images, there were thermal images that we published of the road. That weren't covered elsewhere, and all that was new information that was produced by citizen scientists to complement everything else that was being done by the authority. Right, so that's just the one facet of the community doing the science that we're talking about now. But it was, of course, it's much more than that. And that was just one kind of the common themes that kind of united everybody. But it was also the animal rescues, and it was also the shared time and shared experience, right? And spending time at the hub early on, physically and in person, gathering, and having blessing for the food we're going to eat, right? And having Ikaika, and the Kīlauea Ala band sit down and play a concert for people who were there, right? Or other volunteers come, right? Many different groups of musicians came and entertained people at the hub. Like it was very needed, a very needed break, right? Let's think about something, let's do something that's not eruption related for once, right? For at least an hour or 2 hours, and then we'll get back to it because it's going to be there still. Right, and that was it was a big part of it, having that kind of shared experience, all together in person to start, and then online digitally after we all dispersed and went wherever we went, whether it was other parts of the island or elsewhere in the world, right? That's something we can relate to today in 2020 with the coronavirus pandemic, is that the online digital aspect of a shared experience, right? There's something there, right? It's not everything. It's not even fully enough, right? But it's an important thing that connects us. It helps us kind of go through this together, and to talk about this in the future, to each other, even if we didn't go through it in the same place.
I think one of the greatest benefits of community, whether it's a small community like Puna or whether it's a huge community like the world, that shared experience, that community, that's the key to keeping everybody together, is just to have, and we can't do it. We had to do it digitally then. We have to do it digitally now. We have to do it in whatever way makes sense, but it needs to be done.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to me that, there's a lot of the disagreements people had with each other, different points of view, all those things kind of vanished once it was eruption response. Right, and then once eruption response was over, they kind of reemerged. But it's there's something really unifying about it, right? And that's something that we really could examine a little closer today and learn from, right? That we need more of that unification now, and a little bit less of this separation and division, which we see in 2020 with all different. Well, let's respond this way, let's respond that way, let's respond this way, let's respond that way. You're an idiot, or what have you? I mean, it's the shared experience is really, as you say, one of the most important things that we have that we probably should be focusing on, right? That's kind of, we're really all in it together, and we're going to solve this by being in it together, not by creating divisions and you guys do this and I'm going to do that, and like, well, I don't care what you think, I'm going to do this anyways. Or that stuff is not community building, right? That's the divisions. It's the focusing on a sharing and a constructive part that makes it the positive community strength, resilience that we're touting today.
And that's what's going to get us into the future.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's why we wanted to share with this whole story with you guys. 2 years later, we could have waited a lot longer for us to deal with the pain, with the loss, the process, everything. But as it is here, we were dealing with another disaster, and the time is now, and to share these lessons and share these insights and the inspiration that we had, right? The positivity and the hope that we really could, and we did overcome a lot of different aspects that we couldn't foresee. We didn't feel like we should have necessarily even had to deal with some of those things, but we still dealt with them. We came out of it stronger on the other side of it. The shared experience was so strong that it really unified us through all kinds of other events as well. And one kind of interesting side story to this is the impact on the elections that occurred, right? Because it turned out that one of our sitting council members, Eileen O'Hara, made a, this was 48 hours before the election was going to happen. And her opponent, Ashley Kirkowitz, was one of the founders of the community hub, right? And so there's going to be campaigning and politicking happening, right? But really, in my perspective, what really went wrong there for Eileen is she criticized the uhonua Puna community hub directly, and not the organizer and her organization skills, right? So that we'll leave that aspect of the politics to the side, but people who were affiliated with the hub were very offended, and they went online on social media and they spread this information, and there was from my perspective, a pretty big and quick backlash that came about to those comments that that Pu'uhonua Pua hadn't accounted for donations, that they were hijacking donations from other organizations, right? Like that was the real damaging stuff right there. And so when the results came in 48 hours later, it was a landslide victory, for our new councilwoman, Ashley Kirkowitz, founder of the Hub, right? So, like I said, we'll leave all politics aside from that, but let's just say that the community, our Hub community, our response community was so galvanized and unified. But at that moment in time, that was the wrong time for that to happen. Eileen has done plenty of work in the past and keeps working today. She's a great member of our community still today. So this is not, disparaging an individual, but really just like, a couple of missteps at that really bad moment. And so kind of, moving on from there, the effect of the election, we're still kind of galvanized and bonded when the eruption was over, when it came time to talk about reopening roads and protesting roads and pushing our government to open roads faster and to help recovery of people faster, to kind of help people who had property and still had payments, for example, to, find some way to address that, to either, make use of the property, or discussions of possibly getting bought out, we'll talk about it a little bit as well. But, long and short of it is that we're kind of held together throughout this whole roller coaster that kept going when eruption was over, as far as recovery. How to get roads, how to get water, how to get infrastructure, how to get funds, right? How to get people in Honolulu to believe that this problem in Puna was worth spending money on, even though it wasn't Honolulu. All those different aspects of it, right? That was a powerful thing for us, and it held through. And, after
it's history in the making.
All that
it's
time
history that's being made. Our families are going home, our farmers are going home, and just want to mahalo all of you that have been a part of this process to get us to this point today. He mu oya, he mu na moi inu na moi moya na puna huna hamia. He mu oya, eli noa ya noa honua. He mu oya, he mu na moi inu na moi moya na puna huna hamia. He mu oya, eli noa ya noa honua.
And that was a blessing of the road right there, and it was another healing moment, right? It seems like we have a lot of these, one step forward, one step, and take another step, and take another step, and, the reopening of the road, protests are a step, and the reopening of the road is another step, and, announcing of more funds to restore the water is another step, and we're still just, one foot after the other, and we're still not even halfway there, it seems like, as far as where we'd like to be back to. But we're still united enough, 2 years later, to kind of keep pushing on this, right? And we're still pushing for the pull around, and we're still pushing for more roads, and we're still pushing for more water and restoration of houses and driveways and everything else. It can be a long, road, right? But once the community is together, it really can keep pushing forward, and it's a boon for all those years to come after the disaster.
As long as the community holds together, they can move into the future. If they don't hold together, we won't make it. We need to make sure the community holds together now more than ever, because the community is the entire world.
Yeah, exactly. Keep reflecting on those lessons from 2018 and see what we can learn here in 2020. And, volcanoes are one kind of disaster, right? That kind of, in its own special way, require some special thoughts. We have lava hazards on the islands. And there's been talk about whether those zones that are the highest risk should be redeveloped or not. Proposed by our Senator Macy Hirono was floated. Should we even do this? Should we buy people out instead? Right, and that's a really tricky thing because these subdivisions have been developed historically in areas that were dangerous, but they were developed, and people do own property there now, and you can't just take it away. So it's a very tricky situation there, right? And there are similar situations at other places in the world where you have geologic hazards as well, whether it's one example I'm familiar with is having gone to school in North Carolina, and people build houses on the Outer Banks and the barrier islands. And every year, the hurricanes come in and move those barrier islands, 1 foot over this way. And after 20 years, well, this person's house is in the water, right? And so, well, do you just pay them to rebuild the house, or do you buy them out? Do you restrict the land use? Should you be building there in the first place? These are all valid questions. There's not any easy answers. And no easy solutions, especially given that they already exist, right? But these are things that we consider as a society, like, how often eruptions happen. What's a worthwhile risk? What's the risk of being in a place where an eruption might come through this big once every 100 years, as opposed to somewhere more tornadoes might come through every year, right? Those are not easy questions, but these are an aspect of the fallout that we still deal with, right? And maybe part of the reason why some of the politicians are not so gung-ho to very quickly restore all this stuff, right? And so here we are, kind of still stepping through a limbo 1 foot at a time. And these images are just showing, at the very top, the close-in of Leilani before and after the eruption with, Fissure 8, right top and middle. The middle panel is showing Lani Puna before and after, and the bottom one is showing Kapoho before and after. You guys can really see how everything has been repaved, resurfaced, right? And all those little white specks are all the houses, right? I've, made a point to not show anyone's houses burning, but, that is, in my mind, those visions are in my mind. They're probably in your mind, Lay, right? They're in everyone who lived through this. That's kind of is in the background for any of you guys watching after the fact, didn't see this eruption, just keep that in mind, right? I'm not showing anyone's house is burning on purpose, because that's just too much. And, that is the question, what's too much? How much is too much living in a volcano? Like, where do you live? How far do you go? And so we still have these issues to address as a community moving forward. And, we still have a lot of work to do. And so kind of to wrap it all up here, what lessons have we learned, from what happened in 2018? We've kind of picked a few, out here and there, from our story so far, but, our inquiries, our reports from the county have found failures, right? It's not surprising given that there was so much for citizens to do. And, our newly elected councilwoman, well, not newly elected anymore, but, the one who was elected after the election fiasco, has stated that reading the report, it's evident there's so much room for improvement. But what I don't see is what's the plan going forward? Who is coordinating all of this? Right. So there's a lot of lessons that we can look back at, but we haven't really changed much as far as the response is written on paper, how we respond to these things. Right. That knowledge lives within us as individuals, as part of the community. That's where the knowledge actually lives, not in any official building anywhere else. And that's why it falls to us to share this with you guys. And this other facet of, responding to disasters that we have as humans, that is not part of the organizations that we set up for our own benefit, right? So, it's worth, pointing out, hey, we need a higher standard, right? We need, for all the physical things, we need better evacuations sooner and more organized, right? Housing's got to be in place beforehand. You can't just be like, okay, go evacuate, and there's no mattress for you to go on, or like nothing for you to use, right? Meals, like where people are going to eat, the supplies, personal care. If you have special needs, if you're disabled, or you have any special needs, right? Your medication got left behind. You don't have your medication anymore, and you can't get a prescription anymore, because whatever it happens to be, all those things, we could do better in that, right? Pets are something we've harped on already for long enough, right? Access information as well, right? And that's something we've also talked about. The standard that I've heard repeated again and again as far as why we did well during this eruption was because there were no deaths, right? Clearly you're talking about humans, no human deaths, because, we know that the pets, even that whole no death standard is kind of has an asterisk next to it, because this individual, Mark Kramer, went missing on June 18th. After approaching the Lava River, and his last communication was a call stating that he was lost near the Lava River. And, even though there are rumors swirling online as far as what his motives were for being there and everything else, right? This is still an unanswered question of what happened to this guy, and where is the official follow-up and response? And if we're going to say, okay, he didn't die of the lava, okay, well, where is he? And then we can maybe say, yeah, no one died from the lava. But let's back up. And is that even a good enough standard in the first place, right? Is no one dying the standard we really want to go for? Is like, to me, that's like going for a C in your paper, right? In your class, right? I just want to go for, okay, no one died, great, done, I'm done. Like, where's happy hour? That's not the attitude here. It should be, maybe what can we do to reasonably prevent any needless suffering, right? Like, someone's pet is stuck in her house and the house is burning down. That person is suffering, right? that didn't have to happen. There were so many cases where that didn't have to happen. So maybe we need to change the standard too. Did we do everything we possibly could have? Maybe not like, to the ends of the earth, but within reason, right? To minimize suffering. And well, you didn't die, you must be fine. A lot of improvements can be made, right? And official response. And one of the ways that we can see this going forward, especially now in this new era, is collaborating with the community, right? Leverage social media, right? To use the people who are willing to come out and who really have it in their hearts to help out, because that happens to be their niche of the skills they offer. Today, that happens to be virologists, epidemiologists. They happen to know stuff that they can share with everyone else. And we should bring them into the fold and not say, well, those guys know what we're talking about. We're going to do what we want because we know better. Same kind of thing, right? Be more involved. Be more inclusive of the experts, of their little niches, right? In a community. The community's got plenty of them all over the place, right? And then the last thing to kind of talk on is, you've already mentioned we had 2 different weather events right after the eruption in 2018, right? There was multiple disasters within a few months. And we were lucky it didn't happen exactly at the same time, right? But looking forward, we're in disaster now. This disaster may last for many, many months, or if it might last for a few months and then abate, and then it might come back, and it might abate, and who knows, right? But it's only a matter of time in a place as dynamic as Hawaii Island that we have multiple things happening at the same time, whether it's pandemic and an eruption, or eruption and tsunami, or hurricane and eruption. There's all the different possibilities, solar interference, knocking out communication. There's all the different possibilities that we, not to go down a giant rabbit hole, but like we should be prepared for multiple things to happen at the same time. So if our capacity was strained with one event happening in slow motion for 4 months when nothing else was going on, right, then we could see that there were cracks in the system exposed even back then. They were re-exposed in 2020, right, Leigh?
I really think that the whole crux of it is we really need to have a plan before it happens, in place, ready, so that when it does happen, all we have to do is go to the plan and say, okay, go.
We've heard that there was a plan, right, for Puna, but because of 2015 and 14, right, we've talked about that kind of precedent. And so the mayor at the time made a plan, right, for the next time. But unfortunately, as we've heard, that plan was jettisoned early on, and we went with no plan. And so that was also disturbing, right? And that to me may be something we could protect against with some legislation for our county, right? That should be illegal to do, to throw out the plan, in my opinion. In any case, we should be prepared for, for an eruption to happen while we're dealing with COVID. We should be prepared for a tsunami to happen while we're dealing with COVID, or an earthquake, or a fire and an earthquake, or you get where I'm going with this, right? So, yeah, I mean, COVID is what we're dealing with today, right? And it's really the strength of our community that's going to get us through it. Leigh and I, we've lived this already once, essentially. We're living through it again now and sharing it with everybody. And this is really the point of it, is that the resilience from our community is what's going to keep us up through all this, right? And fill in any gaps in any response, and it's not about so much the who gets the credit, or like, okay, well, the money's funneled through here and through there. In the end, it doesn't matter. Right? It's a lot about what the individuals can make work, right? It's the individual who managed to get the funding from one place to the other, and not the actual funding source itself that matters, right? And we found also that, being sustainable is crucial, right? In these times of crisis, both physically sustainable, right? Like having all the physical stuff you need nearby, accessible, but also, in communication, right? Like there could be times when you just can't get information because you don't have a phone, you don't have internet, and your TV's in your burned down house, and you don't have a radio, you're living out of the shelter, right? You have to be able to sustain communication, and we can use more effort and infrastructure with that as well, right? Locally as well, right? To make sure we can always communicate with each other. Let's say the internet cable to the mainland gets cut someday, right? Can we still operate and talk to each other in just Hawaii, or are we all just done and can't talk to each other down the road anymore, right? Something to think about right there, right? And really focusing on individuals, right? It's like the last thing I'll say, right? there are so many experts with personal experience, that have some aspect, whether it's someone who's lived through a crisis, responded to it already, or, like, for example, when we were at the hub, there were some of the aunties who were like, oh yeah, this is my third eruption. I've had 3 houses burned down by lava in my life. No big deal. No big deal. Right? That's amazing to hear when it's your first time. Really amazing thing to hear when it's your first time, right? So, mobilize those people, right? Mobilize the guy who, has been writing software to read images from the USGS and plot graphs from it already. Mobilize that guy to, make a plot of your temperature on your plates over the highway, right? Mobilize a guy who's done GIS mapping and made your map for, like, use all these people, right? They're all around already anyways. And, they all want a better community. We all want a better community. We're, like, the bottom line, like, the government is us as well, but it's like a more detached version of us, right? Like the closer version of us is our community, right? That we see every day, that's, there's no filter of like, okay, well, we want a new road, but I have to go through all those different laws and everything else. And there's this separation that exists, right? And I'm talking about more of a local grassroots community level than that, right? Because we as individuals can respond faster than an institution can. An institution wants to turn its ship. It's going to take months and months and years of let's write new legislation, let's vote in legislation, let's lobby legislation, let's change things. Okay, well, the budget's this, the budget's that. And we know, like, it's been 2 years and we have one road. We're glad to have the one road, but it's one road, right? As individuals, people have made their own road and driving out to the beach already, right? That's already happened. So individuals have way more power, and we have to recognize that and, not be afraid to take this action. Take action on your own in your own community, right? To help where the need it really is. And, less of, hey, there's a failure and there's another failure and there's another failure. And like, oh, you guys are a bunch of idiots and you guys don't know what you're talking about either. It's like, well, how about let's be part of the solution, right?
Absolutely. It's not about, there's not a blame game. There's not an us and a them. There's only we. And all of us together have to be part of that community in order for the community to work the way that it needs to.
So we'll finish off with some credits here. I want to recognize, all the different citizen scientists, the whole cadre that I was part of, since that was like more of my inner circle, right? These people we're dealing with all the time, all the pilots and photographers and other community journalists. By no means is this everybody, right? These are just the people that I could fit on this slide, right? And more generally, right, all the helpers, all the hub crew, the helpers at all the other shelters, and everyone did what they could, within the limits of what they could, right? And so all those people, deserve recognition as well. And we could be reading names for hours if it came to that, right? So just kind of keep it general and say thank you to everybody who was part of that. And it's something that will be part of my life forever. I'm sure yours as well, Lei.
Mine too, and I'm grateful for all of them.
Yeah. So right on. Thank you so much, Lei. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for sharing your insights in the community.
Thanks for having me.
Mahalo, and thanks everyone for joining us. Aloha.